Coming up, we start our DTVC Extra look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 1. We'll be looking at movies Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk. Then next week, we've got Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and New Horror Express. He'll be back on. We'll be looking at the Seagal film, Shadow Man. So it's going to kind of keep up with Scott's wanting for us to look at all of Seagal's DTV films. So that was a really fun conversation. Excited for everybody to check that out. In 2 weeks, we'll continue the DTVC Extra look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 1, with Iron Man 2 and Thor. And then the week after that, Ty is going to be back on. We're going to be looking at two John Malkovich DTV flicks, One Ranger and Mind Cage. So we're going to call that episode Malky on the Skids. So that'll be a fun one. And then we close out the month with the last of the DTVC Extra look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 1. We'll be looking at Captain America and the Avengers. But then also that is probably going to be the end for the DTVC Extra, at least for the foreseeable future. The plan is from there to go weekly, but with guests weekly. So at this stage, I'm booked up at least to have guests through February, and the plan is to just sort of make sure that I'm on top of the scheduling piece, because that's really what's hurt us the most in terms of getting guests consistently. It really isn't people wanting to be on, people being available to be on. It's been me just reaching out to people and saying like, hey, do you want to be on? When should we book a time? And so I'm going to try to do a better job of that. But that's the goal for 2023. So the goal, for 2024. We're starting the new year here. In 2023, that was a plan, was to make the podcast a weekly podcast, but with me doing solo episodes. The solo episodes are good because I have a little bit more control over those solo episodes in terms of like I can just record them. I just have to worry about me when it comes to recording them. So that was good there. In terms of the response to the solo episodes, I think some people have liked them. I've gotten some positive feedback that the numbers show that they aren't as good as ones where I have guests, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the biggest one is that people like to have the back and forth. I think that always makes for a more interesting conversation. Not that me doing solo episodes once in a while or here or there aren't horrible, but I think that's a big piece of it. And I think maybe it's possible too. The topics, depends. There's some times when I have guests on that the solo ones do better than the guest ones, just because it depends on the topic and things like that. But for the most part, I would say when having a guest on, people prefer that. So that's going to be the plan. We're going to see if we can do that. So 2023, we went from bi-weekly to weekly. Now the goal is to go weekly with a guest in 2024. So we'll see if we can make that happen. But that's the plan going forward. In terms of the site, we've also got news for the site as well. So you saw we just did Cypher. So again, pushed back Astro again, the Gary Daniels movie, and did Cypher, which Cypher was one that was covered on a podcast episode with screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. So that was a really fun episode we did in the past. I want to say it was episode 134 maybe, but it's in the archives. We did it, I believe, back in September. So that was a really fun episode that we did. And so I just want to review that movie. But part of the reason why I wanted to do that movie, not just the fact that it was easier because I already had it in the can. I had the episode. I had the screens taken. The movie was fresh in my mind. Whereas Astro, I watched it like 3 years ago. I need to watch it again. So yes, other than the fact that it was all ready to go, and that made it easier. Plus, it's always good to do an episode, do a review that I can dovetail or make a sort of sell the podcast with as well. Have that secondary reason for it. The other thing is that movie features David Hewlett, which on the face of it might not seem like a big deal. But he was actually in our very first review. He was in Boa versus Python. I think I referred to him lovingly, not so lovingly, as the guy from Stargate Atlantis with glasses, or the guy with glasses from Stargate Atlantis is what I called him in that review. But the reason why that's important is that I am starting to go back to those old reviews and, one, getting rid of the Matt Movie Guy links from them, and two, getting rid of the photo buckets and replacing those with actual images. I am still keeping the image pages for those old reviews, so essentially I'm just getting new images. Like, for example, in the case of Bo versus Python, I went and got new images because it was streaming on Tubi. So I got whole new images for that. And those images link back to the image page so you can still see the old images that were there before. In some cases, the movie had no images. And in some of those cases of those ones that had no images, they're also not available on streaming. So they're still not going to have images, but at the very least I can clean up any hot links or anything like that in there that could be bad. Also cleaning up any typos from those. I'm not Lucasing the reviews. I mean, these were reviews that were written in a lot of cases. I mean, the ones I'm doing right now, this is from '07. So you're talking about 28-year-old me versus 44-year-old me. I think my idea for the site at that time was to be kind of like, your bro or buddy at the bar, and so the language in there is, I a lot of times, like when I'm talking about the good and bad in a movie, it's like, oh, the chick was really hot in it, and that's why it was cool, stuff like that I wouldn't write in a review now. But I made the decision not to go back and Lucas those things, just sort of keep them in there and keep it as it is. I'm still debating about how I want to, if I want to change that at all, because one, I like the fact that they were just written and they're just there. Two, it would be a lot of work to go through and change all of them. It's a lot of work as it is. It's going to probably take me the whole year to get through all of the posts that have photo bucket images and Matt Movie Guy hot links within the post. So it's like I'm trying to do like three posts a day. So 900 some odd posts that I've got to do, that roughly works out to about a year for me to do this. So it's going to be a year-long process just to do this part of it. So that's the other piece of it. So I think it's just, at this point, it's really just about cleaning up the images, cleaning up the links, and cleaning up the typos. But the post itself, they're going to stay the same. So what I wrote at that time, whether it wasn't PC, or it's PC for '07 but not PC for 2023, any of that kind of thing, I'm just sort of keeping it as is for now, and then maybe that's something to revisit. But that just to give you a sense of that, keep an eye out for that. Right now, I've done about 12 posts so far, and that's the goal, is to try to do 3 a day and see what I can do. They take about, depending on the post, it takes about 20 minutes per post to fix it up, depending on whether I need to get more images or not, or there's no images to get. So we'll see what happens there, but keep an eye out for that. The other thing is some great news involving the DTVC Digital Archive. So if you remember, there was the archive page that I had before, back when it was the Matt Movie Guy URL. I had that clickable archive that you could go in and just look up a movie. You could click to the letter of the movie, and it would take you right to the review. And then when I lost the Matt Movie Guy domain, right, of course, all of those links were bad. And I just took the archive down and said, the hell, that I'm not going to keep it up anymore. I'm not going to keep doing it. Recently, when I was writing Don's House in the Mountains, I think it was his daughter's name. Her name's Darcy with an apostrophe, so it's D''A RCY. Originally, it was spelled with a lowercase a, and then I decided to change it to an uppercase A. And I saw that Word had this replace feature, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I can replace every Darcy with a lowercase a with an uppercase A. Is that possible? And sure enough, it was. It was easy enough. I just kind of, parked that in my brain that I did that. It was worked great, all that stuff. And then I started thinking about the archive, and I was like, I wonder if I could just take all of the HTML code for that archive, paste it into a Word file, and replace all the Matt Movie Guys with dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. I did it, and it worked. So the archive is back up. It's back available. The only thing is, of course, is that when I came back from hiatus in 2019, of course, we had lost the Matt Movie Guy domain. So I had taken the archive down, and I wasn't updating the archive anymore. I had started to do an unclickable archive and just sort of tried my best to kind of do that. And I wasn't keeping up with that either. But what I decided to do is now that I have this, the archive back up and going, I'm going to do like a month a day. That's kind of the plan. I did the month of September in 2019. That was the first month we came back. I've put those ones in the archive. Yesterday I did October. Today I'll do November. So that's the plan. So try to take a month a day to get the archive up. So I'm hoping like in a couple months, maybe 3 months, we should be back up to date so that all of those, I think it's like 260 plus reviews that I've done since I've come back from hiatus that aren't in the archive. So we'll start getting more of those up soon. But it's exciting, right? It's exciting news that the archive's back. And people have asked for the archive. I think that's probably the biggest thing people have asked for. I thought about trying to put one on Letterboxd, but just the work involved with that of like going to, and I'd started it. I mean, I think I got to like 100 movies that I had added to this private Letterboxd thing that was supposed to be an archive of all the movies we've reviewed on there. And it was just a lot of work. So this was a huge, huge thing to discover that all I had to do was just replace it. And there was probably a programmer thing I probably could have done to make the replacement somehow. Anyway, I'm not technically inclined like that. I'm not, not as savvy when it comes to that kind of thing. But anyway, that's the thing. So you can go back to the site. Actually, I think it's the first thing on the sidebar after my novel. So you've got the ads for each of my novels, and then underneath that it says the DTV archive. Click the button. Takes you right there. So pretty much anything from right now, it'll be from October 2019 earlier is going to be in that archive. And again, we're going to try to work on maybe adding a month's worth. So, each month I did like maybe 4 or 5 posts for the most part. I think in 2020 during the pandemic, there was a period I was doing like maybe like 2 posts a week. So some of those have like maybe 13 or 14, but it's not as much work to add to the archive as it is to add to fix those posts like I've been doing with there. So that's some other good news there that we have. I think overall the year we've had in the blog was probably one of our best years that we've had in terms of just people coming to the site. And in a way, right, that was maybe bound to happen just because I've posted so many reviews and I'm posting reviews again that they're just, now there's like 1,200 plus reviews. So there's 1,200 plus chances for somebody to stumble across one of my reviews, whether they're Googling a movie, whether they're on IMDb and they want more information about a movie. So there's a lot of different chances for people to come to the site, and that's part of it. I mean, our Outlaw Johnny Black review, of course, that one just blew up. That was a huge one, one of our biggest of all time, definitely by far the biggest since we've come back from hiatus. So there's that as well. But I think that was one of the things when I came back from hiatus in 2019. I really wasn't sure what the future of blogging and having a written site like the DTV Connoisseur was going to be. It felt like the future was in podcasting, right? The future was in having a YouTube channel. I don't want to say TikTok. I don't think I'd be able to make it on TikTok, but definitely like, streaming, making videos, all of that stuff, Instagram, doing reels, that all seemed to be the future. And having a site where you just write 8 paragraphs and add some images, that seemed to be like that was going away, and it feels like that's sort of turned a little bit, at least in terms of my site. That like the people are coming to read the reviews more often now. It might just be that people are getting back into watching movies a lot more, and they're curious about more movies, and they're coming to the site that way. That could be part of it too, but I want to build off that momentum. I want to make the blog more of a focus. I will say, since I have been going through those old posts and removing the photo bucket links and uploading my own images, there's been a little bit of a catharsis. It's almost like I feel like I'm getting my site back, which seems weird, right? Because it feels like it should be my site all the time. I'm the one who's writing everything. But, that photo bucket thing, it was. I don't know if I want to say it was a violation, but it felt like a theft of sorts, right? That they promised this one thing, like, oh, you can host your images on our site for free and, put the links back to your sites. And then knowing, and it wasn't just me that did this, right? There were a lot of people that did the same thing, right? Finding out that, you go to your site one day and suddenly you see all of your images taken down and them saying like, oh yeah, if you want your images back, you got to pay like whatever amount of money. And now, yes, the images are there, but it's like, the watermark thing, which just looks gross. It's like whenever I look at like my stats for the week and I see what post did the most, right? Most of the posts that did the most views are old posts, and I just see this thumbnail with a photo bucket watermark on it. So it's something that really frustrated me when it came to my site. I think it also kind of hurt me when it came to coming back from hiatus. I may have come back sooner in the mid 2010s. And I was just kind of really dejected that they did that. I mean, it was a really, really shitty thing that they did, I think, just overall. I understand they wanted to try to monetize their site, but holding other people's stuff hostage like that, I think is a really, really shitty thing. And so it has kind of felt really good to go through these posts and just, going into the HTML code, right, and just deleting those photo bucket links has just been, something about it has felt really, really nice. So I'm going to, again, it's going to be about a year-long process to get all of the posts up to date, but that's going to be the goal. Is so that eventually dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com is like, it's completely mine again, right? That there are no more photo bucket links. And again, the Matt Movie Guy links, we're going to be removing those as well. So when you go into a post now, there won't be any hot links to anything, unless it's like maybe certain things where the link is still good, but getting rid of all those, because remember what I did with the old posts is I went through and like, for example, if Dolph Lundgren was mentioned in a post, I would I created a hot link to his tag, so you could see all of the movies that Dolph Lundgren did by clicking on that. Well, I mean, you can just go to the bottom of the post as well and click on his tag that way to find out all his movies. But what it meant is that every time that Dolph Lundgren link was there with Matt Movie Guy, if somebody clicked on it, it took them either to a junk site, maybe a virus or something. It was just not a good thing. So we're going to start cleaning all that stuff up. So that's I'm excited to be able to start doing that. Again, it has been a little bit of a cathartic experience as well to kind of feel like I'm getting my site back from some of these things that I lost it with in the mid 2010s. So yeah, all really exciting stuff that we have going on there. And then, yeah, I guess some other things, just some other kind of house clean kind of things. Again, still doing two middle-aged men watching 90s era Jim Belushi unironically with John Cross of After Movie Diner. He recently posted the episodes 2, 3, and 4 that we did on his podcast, so you can hear the audio versions of them. I listened to the Separate Lives one the other night. It was a lot of fun. So even if you're not watching the movie, it is still kind of a lot of fun. I think we're going to try to do one Thursday of this week. That's the plan, is to do one Thursday of this week. And but you never know what's going to happen. One of us sometimes schedules get in the way. Sometimes that happens. But I think the way it's going to work going forward is like if you available to watch us stream it live, that's the best, right? You can see us doing it right there in live. I also know, because we do it at 8 p.m. Eastern time US. That's like what. 1 in the morning in England, in the UK. So that's obviously, that's a little bit difficult to expect somebody on a weeknight to stay up then. So one of the things we know is that Twitch will keep the recording for 7 days. So if you're somebody who's not in a time zone that can catch it live, definitely go onto Twitch. So After Movie Diner has a Twitch account, so you just follow After Movie Diner on Twitch, and you can watch the recording up to 7 days after that. And then I think John might be putting the full recordings on under the Patreon, his Patreon account. So you can always subscribe to his Patreon and have full access that way to everything. What happens with some of these is that YouTube takes them down eventually. I know we did Mr. Destiny. I think YouTube took that one down. They also took down Separate Lives, so it's hard to keep up with them on YouTube, but that's the goal. But also, the audio versions are a lot of fun, so definitely, you should be subscribed to After Movie Diner anyway. And check that out. All right, I think that is pretty much everything. So again, before we launch into our theme song here, check out the novels. I do have. Do I have any shouts out? I know some people bought the novel recently, but I can't remember if anybody came to me and said, "Hey, I bought it." I mentioned Rich, so Rich and John have bought the most recent one. There's some other people in the past have bought have bought the novel. So I can maybe kind of go through and see other fellow bloggers and podcasters who have mentioned it to me that they bought a copy of one of my older novels, and I can maybe put together that list for everybody. But we have made some sales recently, so people are definitely buying the book. I don't know if it's listeners, but if you are listening and you've bought one of my books, let me know, and I can definitely shout you out on here. But Don's House on the Mountain still available. Pop onto Amazon. You can pick that up in a paperback or Kindle. I think with the Kindle thing, again, if that's the best and most affordable way for you to get it, definitely get it that way. The other thing I keep forgetting to mention is we have our Threadless site. So if you want some DTVC merch, I don't think there's anything that looks better than a T-shirt, right, with the DTVC VHS logo that my friend Heather Currier put together for us way back when we started the site in like 06, 07. That always looks stylish, right? That's always great. Also, John Cross from After Movie Diner, he designed some really cool things. Some old VHS covers. He took some old VHS action covers and designed some really cool shirt logos for us. So I'm going to try to pick up one of those myself with a little holiday money. But if you've got some holiday money burning a hole in your pocket, not a fan of books, our Threadless site. The link is in the podcast description. Go there and pick up, again, T-shirts, hoodies, mugs. I've got a couple mugs myself. Tote bags. I haven't gotten the tote bag yet, but I think I got to definitely get the drawstring bag. Actually, is what I mean. I don't like the idea of that. So, yeah, go pick up some of our merch there. Hey, I can't think of anything that's going to be more stylish, right, than rocking some DTVC gear. So definitely check that out. And of course, if you buy anything from there, let me know. Shout me out, and I'll give you a shout out here on the podcast as well. All right, well, why don't we do our theme song here, and then we will get into talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1 with Iron Man. All right, we are back, and we are going to look at Iron Man here, the first film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1. Before we do, I wanted to sort of set the stage for what led to the creation of Marvel Studios, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Iron Man, with them making Iron Man as the first movie. So I kind of wanted to set that stage, give a brief history of just sort of movies, comic book movies, and sort of how that all worked out, especially with Marvel in mind. So a little bit more of a focus on Marvel, but, get into DC as well. I mean, for Marvel, right, their first sort of live action adaptation of one of their characters was Captain America, right? 1944. There's a serial that Republic Pictures makes. Republic was known for taking liberties with the characters that they were adapting at that time. So they'd done, I think they did a Shazam. They did the Batman one. So they'd done some other comic book things at that time. They were known for taking liberties, but with the Captain America one, it was sort of another level, right? So Captain America's not Steve Rogers. He's some district attorney, right? He doesn't get superpowers from the serum. I don't even know if he has superpowers, right? Doesn't have a shield, right? He's got a gun. A lot of different, a lot of things that what we think of as Captain America weren't there. I think they were known as Timely Comics at that time. They went to Republic and they were like, well, you got to change these things. And Republic said, well, we can't change them. We're already too deep into production. It's going to cost too much money. And then they also said, we're also not contractually obligated to do any of this stuff. So that's it. That's sort of the first adaptation that we get of a Marvel character. So at that time, right, I think the three big Marvel characters would have been Captain America, Namor, and the Human Torch, but not the Fantastic Four Human Torch. Right, he was like an android that would combust or start on ignite on fire if he was like near oxygen or something like that. I don't know exactly how it worked. That's the first time that you get a Marvel character, a live action adaptation of a Marvel character. We don't see another one until the Electric Company, right? In the 70s, they have Spider-Man as part of their show. That's in the mid 70s, right? 74 to 77. I, of course, was too young. I was born in 79 to remember that when it was aired live, but PBS had a lot of programming from the 70s that they would air in the 80s. And so I do remember seeing that there. So there we go. We got about 30 years, right, between Captain America in 1944 and then Spider-Man on Electric Company in 1974. In that time, there's a couple other things that happen. And one of the things I want to touch on, a couple DC adaptations. We have the Adventures of Superman, right? I believe I don't know if it was the first television series based off a comic book, but it's definitely the first DC one. It was a syndicated show, which I didn't realize. I think I thought it was part of one of the major studios, but it was syndicated. It kind of followed the beats of the serials. It had a kind of a serial feel to it. It was also kind of a detective feel. Lex Luthor, I don't remember being a part of it. I don't think he was. I think he was a part of one of the movies. I think it was like the Atom Man or the Mole Man or something. One of them had Lex Luthor in it. But again, these were just like regular crime bosses that Superman would fight. And so that show lasted for 6 years. Then we get another major adaptation of DC Comics. That's the Batman series in the mid-60s. That one's important for a few reasons, I think, and it's important to kind of bring up here, even though again, these are DC Comics and not Marvel. So first off, that Batman, people talk about how campy it was, right? Of course it was. It was campy on purpose. There were a few theories about this. One was that the old Batman serials were being aired at the Playboy Mansion in Chicago, and people were making fun of it. Actually, by the time that would have happened, Batman, the show was already in production. It was already ready to happen. But I do think there's a little bit of a polygenesis with that, because if you look at the ages of the people who did that early Batman, they would have been, sort of World War II generation, late World War II generation, silent generation. They would have grown up with those serials, and I think they would have had a sense of the campiness of the serials and wanted to make fun of them. Because if you watch the old Batman, it mocks like all of the conventions of those old serials, and of course with the cliffhanger and all of that stuff, it really plays on that a lot. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is the comic at that time was actually becoming a little bit goofier. That's one of the things that I'd read, which I didn't know. It would become darker after this. I think the real hardcore fans that didn't like that it was becoming campy, didn't like that this was the version that they got out there, and so they made it darker in the 70s. So that's an important thing to note there. And then also there's the fact that comic books at that time were starting to drop in popularity. They weren't quite what they had been earlier. And there was some sense that maybe TV was the cause of it, that kids were watching TV more and reading comics less. What Batman does is actually makes comics cool for younger people again, or sort of introduces a new audience to them. I think there's some other factors at play. I don't think it was just Batman. I think also Marvel at that time creating kind of new characters for a new age, right? The characters that were created in the 40s, they were or the late 30s into the 40s. They were there to sort of defeat evil, right? Defeat the Nazis, defeat the Japanese, whoever it was that were fighting America in World War II. Those values had gone away, right? It was a new world in the 60s. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, they'd started creating new characters in Marvel that really resonated with younger people at that time. So you've got that combination with the Batman piece. Like people watching Batman at that time, right? You had like those World War II generation and maybe, older silent generation parents who got the jokes, right? They got what the camp was for. They grew up watching those serials as kids, going to the movie theater, and they got the, what the joke was. It resonated with them, right? They thought it was funny that they were making fun of those old serials, but then their kids, right? They're watching this like it's very colorful. The characters are a lot of fun, and that got them into comics. I mean, it created this huge sensation that I think they talked about they weren't expecting. Now, of course, that show was canceled after 3 years, and as you read sort of the history of it, it's one of those deals where like ABC that was running it, they were kind of cutting the budget kind of consistently over time. They'd made the movie, which was also successful, but they kept cutting the budget. Finally, they just canceled the show, and they were going to redo it or they were going to pick it back up on NBC. And what happened was NBC, I guess they either weren't sure if they wanted to pick it back up, or if they were going to they weren't sure if they wanted to pick it back up. They were thinking about it, I guess, was what the deal was. And in that process, they bulldozed the people who produced Batman. They bulldozed the Batcave set. So when NBC came back and said, "Yeah, all right, we'll pick it up," they're like, "Well, you got to rebuild the Batcave." And I'm like, "Forget it, we're not doing that." So that was the end of that. And so that's kind of the end of that that period there. But again, I think that was a very seminal piece. One other factor I want to mention about the old Batman series. So the old Batman series was owned, the rights to it were owned by 20th Century Fox. But of course, Disney bought 20th Century Fox. So they actually own the rights to the old Batman series and the old Batman movie. So it's interesting. It's the one DC property that Disney has. Disney, they kind of had a tough year this year. The fact that they own the rights to that, and they own the rights to the Predator, and they do Star Wars stuff, and so they know George Lucas. I mean, Lucas, maybe you could take some of those old Batman episodes and maybe replace Cesar Romero with the Predator. I don't know. We could get our Batman Predator that way. Just saying. But I think it's an important piece about the history, which we're going to get into as we start to get into the Marvel adaptations that come in the 70s. So in the 70s, right? Again, we talked about how in 74. Electric Company does a version of Spider-Man, right, in their show. But also, you've got CBS doing the Shazam live-action show and the Wonder Woman live-action show. Now, those ones were a little bit campy, but not too campy, right? They're not definitely on the Batman side in terms of campiness. But then when we get into the Marvel ones, they're also CBS ones, the later part of the decade. So in 77, you get Amazing Spider-Man. And so I think Nicholas Hammond was the actor who played the lead on that. He was like adamant that he didn't want it to be like campy like Captain America, and I think that's not Captain America, campy like Batman, right? Which is interesting, right, when you think about it, because that's kind of again showing sort of the generational differences, right? That someone who's slightly older than Nicholas Hammond, right? So Nicholas Hammond, I believe, was born in 1950. I think that's what, if it wasn't 1950, it was like the late 40s, right? So he would have been early boomer, later silent generation versus those sort of, the silent generations who were born like late 20s, early 30s, who would have grown up with serials and got the joke. These boomers, right, they grew up with more TV, less of that serial kind of stuff. And so they saw it, but they also would have been a little bit old for Batman, right? Think about it, if Nicholas Hammond born in 1960, he's a teenager when Batman is out. So he's probably looking at this like, this show is corny. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. So when he's old enough, right, and he's doing Spider-Man, he says, yeah, I don't want it to be campy like the old Batman. And that was definitely what they tried, they didn't want to do. They kind of made it more almost like a detective show that's very, very similar to the detective shows that were big at that time, like a Mannix or a Cannon. I think Mannix and Cannon were more compelling than the old Spider-Man. The other issue, of course, with that Spider-Man was that it had a limited budget, and so they didn't use any of his villains, which I get not wanting to do like Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus, right? Like those would have been expensive. Lizard would have been interesting looking, right? I get all of that kind of thing. But I mean, Kraven the Hunter, they couldn't have done him. Kingpin, they couldn't have used Kingpin as a baddie. So but I think that's one of the issues, right? Is that you're getting these shows, these superhero shows that don't use the villains gallery. And of course, Spider-Man has, akin to Batman, one of the best villains galleries. So that the show lasts for about, I want to say it's 2 seasons. Is it 2 or 3 seasons? 2 seasons. It's actually not canceled though because it's doing poorly. It was canceled because new leadership took over at CBS, and they didn't want to be known as the superhero channel. So Shazam is already done by that time. Shazam is done before Amazing Spider-Man starts, but Wonder Woman was still going at that time. So they canceled Wonder Woman, canceled Amazing Spider-Man. They kept the Incredible Hulk, though, because that was a little bit different. Yes, it was still a superhero movie, but it was, I don't want to say, it was still a superhero show, right? But it was very human interest based, right? It felt like something... It was like a version of The Fugitive. It was more of a drama, and so I think that's why that one survived. That one lasts until 1982. But 2 things happen in that window that I think are important in terms of comic books. So you've got these live-action television shows in the late 70s. 1978, Superman comes out, right? And I think we look at that now. I don't think we quite think of it because, we've had so many iterations of comic book movies that have come since then, sort of how groundbreaking that film was. It started the huge superhero craze, right, that we have now. And I think, Marvel wanted to get in on it, right? And Marvel wanted to have their own movies, like feature, big screen features of their films. But we see something that happens here that starts to plague Marvel when it comes to big screen features of their films. And that is that it takes too long for them to get off the ground. They're either passed back and forth between different studios, different creative people, whatever it is, but there isn't always a large window to make these compared to the window that it takes for them to get them off the ground. And that's probably most true here because 78, you get Superman, right? 83, you've got Superman 3. And when Superman 3 comes out, the bottom kind of falls out of the superhero genre. It's a very short window, right? It's only 5 years. But Hollywood decided they didn't want to keep making superhero movies after that. They kind of, soured on it. So you've got 84, you've got Supergirl, which I think was already in production before Superman 3 came out in 83. So they were like, it was within the mindset of like, okay, Superman 1, Superman 2 did really well. Star Wars is doing really well. Superman 3 is going to keep this going, so let's do Supergirl as well, and we can, sort of capitalize on it. And then, of course, right, we get the 1987 Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, which kind of essentially ends that era of superhero movies, even though it was kind of already on its way out and starting in 83 with Superman 3. There's a couple of those last gasps. And so that's actually going to be instrumental in sort of what happens with Marvel in the late 80s as well, because of course that has economic repercussions, right, for Golden Globus and Canon, because Superman 4: The Quest for Peace did so poorly. So it's interesting as we end 1987, and then as we get into 1989 with Batman, we're sort of at a bit of a crossroads there with superhero movies. So before we get into Batman, I think it's important to, in 1989, to look at some things that happens with Marvel at sort of the end of the 80s there as well. So one, right, we get those Incredible Hulk TV movies. And if you remember, right, those had Thor and Daredevil in them. Remember the trial of the Hulk, right? Daredevil was defending the Hulk in court. And one of the things, those were 2 shows that were, or 2 TV movies that were meant to be backdoor pilots to a potential Thor and Daredevil show that don't get off the ground. So they don't end up happening. Also, in 1986, this is a little piece of trivia that people don't often realize, but the first ever live action, big screen feature full-on feature, not like a serial, of a Marvel character happens. It's Howard the Duck, right? People don't realize that, but 1986, that's the first ever Marvel big screen feature film, is Howard the Duck. And so it's an interesting piece, right? That's their first movie. And again, it's not for lack of trying, because they are trying at this time to try to get these movies. And so, of course, what happens, and I actually kind of forgot to mention, let me go back a little bit, because in that window of the Superman piece there, I completely forgot to mention that in the late 70s you had the two Captain America TV movies, and that was an attempt to, they weren't really meant to be pilots, they were standalone TV movies, but Reb Brown did mention in an interview that they had the people making those movies, they had planned to try to turn it into a TV show. They pitched the idea to Marvel, and I think Marvel wanted too much. He said it was Marvel wanted too much money per episode. That it was like, the Hulk was they were charging the Hulk a fraction per episode of what they would want the Captain America one to do. So that's why you only get 2 TV movies for that. And then there's a Doctor Strange TV movie that is it's like it was an attempt at a pilot for a series that never happens. One of the things about that one, right, is I think that's the first time we get a Marvel supervillain depicted in live action. That's when Jessica Walters is in that one. So I think that's those are some interesting things to keep in mind, that we do get some of those TV movies at the end of the 70s as well. So we get feature-length movies, but they're TV movies. And again, they're attempts at maybe TV shows that just don't go anywhere. But again, throughout the 80s, based on the Superman boom, there was attempts to try to make a Spider-Man movie. It gets shelved. And then, 1989 comes and Batman premieres. And Batman sort of opens up the door for more superhero movies. Suddenly superhero movies are good again. But again, it's like this idea of like, we don't want the campiness. Right now we're doing a darker kind of superhero movie. So what you get at that time, if you remember, of course, there was a really great sequel, Batman Returns. But also you get movies like The Phantom. You get the Rocketeer. I don't know if the Rocketeer counts in there, but definitely The Phantom, The Shadow. Some of those kind of like darker, like 1940s, like movies set in the past. Kind of a different kind of hero. But Marvel was at that time, they were trying to make their own, adaptation of Spider-Man at that time. And of course, what we do get is we get the Captain America movie. And so that was, Albert Pyun had made that movie. And so that one comes out in 1990, again, in an attempt to capitalize on the Batman success. It's not released theatrically, right? It's only released in direct to video. I think it was released theatrically overseas. Again, Marvel is trying to do these things on the cheap as well. Also, Golden Globus had the rights. I think I don't remember exactly how it worked, but it was like one of those things where it kind of like passed along from person to person, where it was like one studio had it, and eventually, it got passed from studio to studio. So suddenly, like Golden Globus and Canon had it, and then they were like, I think originally they'd wanted to make Spider-Man for a lot of money, and then with the money they lost on Superman, they cut the budget. And so originally Joe Zito was tapped to do Spider-Man, but then when he saw the budget for it, he's like, I don't want to deal with that. So then they passed it off to Albert Pyun, but then he couldn't really make it happen. I think he talked about it. He'd mentioned to me in an email that the money that they had in the budget, they couldn't do the special effects right. It just wasn't going to look good, and that's why they didn't want to do it. But I think there was other talks about the rights reverting back to somebody else. That again, there wasn't much of a market for it at that time. I don't know exactly, but that's some stuff that happened. So there's an attempt at a Spider-Man that doesn't happen in the late 80s, early 90s. We do get Captain America. Of course, there's the Fantastic Four one, which you can see the documentary on that goes into kind of what happened there with that Fantastic Four movie. But essentially, the 90s, it's an interesting era again, right? Because then we get Batman Forever, and suddenly again the comic book thing starts to drop again. And it's I think what's really interesting is to watch how it's DC seems to be driving it, right? Where DC has a really good movie like Superman, or a really good movie like Batman. It builds their stock and kind of builds sort of interest in superhero movies. And then by the time Marvel gets it together to be able to make their own movies, DC has screwed the whole thing up with either Superman 3 or Batman and Robin. And of course, Steel comes out in 97, or no, sorry, Batman Forever, 95. It wasn't as good, but then definitely Batman and Robin. I like Batman and Robin. I think it's a fun movie, but it kind of fallen off by then. And so, Marvel has this issue where they can't really get it together to make these movies, and by the time they get it together, after the movie's been passed around from studio to studio, eventually they lose out, and the market isn't there for it again. But it's interesting how the two are entwined like that. And of course, the other thing to keep in mind about the '90s, right, is that the comic book sort of boom that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, the bottom has fallen out on that, right? And the whole market has collapsed. There are a lot of different things that factored into that. I think the biggest one for me, who was a comic book collector at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, was Image, right? I mean, in the late 80s, early 90s, you had this group of rock star artists and creators with Marvel. I mean, Todd McFarlane was the biggest one, right, with Spider-Man. They had 3 Spider-Man books at the time. They had Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and they liked his work so much that they gave him his own, just Spider-Man, which was a really great book. You had Rob Liefeld, who creates Deadpool and Cable. He essentially said that Marvel wouldn't let him use Wolverine and Spider-Man, so he created his own Wolverine and Spider-Man. Creates 2 of the most iconic characters, right, that have come out in the past 30 years, I would say. I mean, Deadpool he's up there with the classics of Marvel that you think about, the ones that were created in the 60s. Deadpool is on that level, which is just absolutely amazing to, as a kid myself, to remember his first appearance and that kind of thing, to know that he's now at that level there, kind of the way, again, someone who's born in like the 50s would have seen Spider-Man, and seeing him grow into what he's become. That's always been a really cool thing for me. But so you had Liefeld there, you had Jim Lee. They created a whole new X-Men book for Jim Lee, and then all of those guys jump ship and create Image. So what happens is, right, of course, is that the books that were created for them, I mean, obviously, on top of the new X-Men book and Spider-Man, you had X-Force that was created for Liefeld to they kind of reworked New Mutants to work with him and his new characters that he'd created. They all jump ship and they leave these books. So those books suffer, right? At the same time, Image was kind of in over their heads a little bit, right? Because if you remember, if you're old enough at that time, you remember that they had all these great books coming out, and it was like they had all these books coming out, and they would suddenly like get delayed in production, right? Like you'd get like the first 2 Wildcats and then you wouldn't get another one. Or you'd get like the first 2 Youngbloods and you wouldn't get another one because they were running delays. And it turns out like a big part of it, I think there's a documentary on that, the Image Comic Revolution. You should definitely check that out. I've reviewed it on the site. It's a lot of fun. But that's part of it, right? And of course, not only is that affecting Marvel, but it's affecting DC, right? Because DC was struggling at that time too. And then when Image comes in, and it wasn't just Image, right? Valiant was another one that came in with Magnus Robot Fighter, Turok Dinosaur Hunter. But when Image really got going, DC didn't know what to do, so they killed off Superman, right? Remember the death of Superman in the late 90s? I mean, Image, right? Image killed Superman is essentially what happened there. So you've got this whole thing happening where the comic book boom is dropping. The other piece of it that I have to mention too is someone who collected at that time and someone who quit collecting at that time. It seemed like every month 1 or 2 comics would have like this double reverse hologram thing that cost like $5 to $6. And it's like when you had, I had an allowance of like $10. So one of the things was during my time of collecting, comics went from $1 to $1.25. So it went from being 10 comics a week to 8 comics a week. But then it was like with all of these anniversary ones and stuff like that, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you think about it, the 90s. You were hitting a lot of 30th anniversaries of books. You were hitting a lot of milestones, 350, 400 of issues or whatever. But it was like it seemed like every month you were getting too many. So it was like this combination of these big collector books that were way too expensive, and everybody had them, so they weren't worth anything. And then Image, the talent drain from Image going and forming their own thing really hurt Marvel and DC at that time. So there wasn't a lot of money to go around either. So it's a combination of not a lot of money from those, especially Marvel at that time. They didn't have a lot of money to produce these things. The market fluctuating quite a bit, and so it kind of led to this perfect storm into the 90s where a lot of these projects weren't getting off the ground, which is interesting, right? Because that's going to kind of get us closer to where we want to be, right? Which is the creation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And when you look at Marvel's history again of their feature-length films, the next one that comes out after Howard the Duck is Blade. And Blade is still not really one that we think of as a real comic book movie in that sense, right? It's from New Line Cinema. It feels more like a dark action film, which, I love it. I love Blade. Blade 2 is one of my all-time favorite vampire movies, and that's really kind of what it is. It's a superhero movie, but also a vampire movie, and but it again, it's only the second feature length production that Marvel has. You've got X-Men that comes out 2 years later. That one's, I think that's a pretty solid movie. But then in '02, right, I'm again talking about Blade 2 because I love Blade 2, but you get Spider-Man in '02. And that really, really changes the game for Marvel because, that's kind of like their first, that's their first Superman, their first Batman, their first real win on that level that really kind of makes them a huge player in the comic book movie game. And so when Spider-Man comes out in '02, I think in my brain, just sort of thinking about that time period, it felt like there was just like a whole lot of, comic book, especially Marvel comic book adaptations coming out, and that it was sort of like this, I don't know, maybe like a renaissance time for it. But really, when you look at it, when you break it down, yes, I'm a fan of the Blade movies, but they aren't like game changers, really, right? The X-Men movies, they kind of, hit or miss, right? Whereas Spider-Man, again, as I said, Spider-Man was their Superman or their Batman. But the other thing too is that when you look at the period of time, even just going from '02 when Spider-Man comes out to '04 when Spider-Man 2 comes out, you've got Daredevil, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was a solid attempt. I think I was looking forward to that movie. I mean, I liked that they had the fun villains and all that stuff, but it's not anything fantastic. X2, right? This the X-Men sequel. Again, kind of on the mediocre side. I think, again, there's so many bigger things that could have been done with X-Men that they end up doing later on down the road. But, in terms of those movies, it was pretty tame. And then Hulk, right? Ang Lee's Hulk, which, I mean, there are a lot of things you can say about that. I'm going to get into it a lot more when we get into The Incredible Hulk and talk about that a little bit more about what happened there. And then we get the Punisher movie, which, Thomas Jane, fantastic in Dirty Laundry, the short film. That Punisher movie, I know there are a lot of apologists out there for it, a lot of fans of it that try to give it its due. It doesn't have the energy of Dirty Laundry. It doesn't, for me, it's a miss, especially compared to the Dolph Lundgren one that we already had. I also like the one that we'll be talking about, the Punisher Warzone that came out later, comes out the same year as I think it's the same year as Iron Man. It's going to come out around that time anyway. Yeah, Warzone comes out the same year as Iron Man, Incredible Hulk. So that was one that I enjoyed as well. That Punisher in '04, it's very kind of. Lack of a better term, it's sauteed in wrong sauce, right? But we get Spider-Man 2, which really, kind of continues the energy of the first Spider-Man, and I think it does what you want it to do. What's interesting there is there's a little bit of a mention to Tony Stark in that one too. That's like Stark technology that he uses to create his Dr. Octopus tentacles, right? But anyway. So we get Spider-Man 2, and again, if you keep looking down the list, right, you get a lot of misses. You get Blade Trinity, which I remember watching Blade Trinity with one of my friends, and you got Dominic Purcell who plays Dracula, and I remember there's a scene, I think he's talking to Wesley Snipes, and he's like, I remember seeing Christ get crucified, and my buddy burst out laughing, and I mean, because that's the kind of goofy campness, whatever, that was going on there. Fantastic Four movie. I mean, I don't know what you make of that Fantastic Four movie. And then of course in '07 they have the Rise of Silver Surfer, and again it's like what I don't know. And even Spider-Man 3, right, is not quite to the level of 1 and 2. I know my friends of mine, they watched Spider-Man 3. They were like, you're gonna laugh when you go see that one in the theaters. It's pretty goofy. And I mean, I still think it was good. I think it was a solid movie. I think I think Sam Raimi overall, he really does a great job. I think we don't talk about Sam Raimi's Spider-Mans the way we talk about like Christopher Nolan's Batmans or Tim Burton's Batmans, or Richard Donner's Supermans. But I think Sam Raimi's Spider-Mans are in that category. I think again because the third one kind of is a little bit of a letdown compared to the others. I mean, you can make the case for that as well with Batman, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit with the Batman with Dark Knight. Just because of the way it's going to dovetail timing wise with Iron Man, Incredible Hulk. But anyway. What happens with Marvel is that they start looking at these adaptations of their films, and they like the Spider-Man ones. They're a lot colder on the other ones, and they're looking at the way that their movies are being, or their products are being turned into movies. They're starting to have a little bit of flashback, right? I mean, nobody of course would have been alive to have a flashback for what happened in 1944, but it's kind of the same thing, right? That when they try to make their movies or they try to adapt their properties, it's not working. Now, granted, there are other pieces of it that from Marvel's standpoint, I think you have to blame them a little bit, or I don't know if blaming them is the right thing, but they're very, very like tight with who you could use. So, for example, if you bought the rights to Spider-Man, you could use the Spider-Man characters, but you weren't going to be able to use Captain America in one of your movies, right? You weren't going to be able to use the X-Men in your movies, those kinds of things. And so, and part of it, I think, was Marvel would be very restrictive on who you could use or not use, and then also the studios would be like that too, right? It's like, okay, well, if I've got the rights to Captain America, I don't want to let somebody else use Captain America in their movie, right? But it's just there for me, which again, that's going to come up as an issue when we start talking about Incredible Hulk here. But Marvel starts to look at it as like, what if we create our own studio, we make our own movies, and we make them the way we want to make them? And they started to look at some of the rights that were coming back to them. And Iron Man was one that they were going to get the rights back to soon. And they thought, okay, that's a good first one for us to make. Incredible Hulk was an interesting one, and we'll talk about that in the next segment here about what that one ends up meaning for them. But they started to come up with this idea of like, okay, the characters that we have the rights to, we could maybe make our own movies, make them the way we want to make them, and even put them together and make our own Avengers, right? Kind of make our own crossover kind of thing with it. And that's where Iron Man is born. That's where Iron Man comes from. So just to kind of, maybe transition out of the overall history, we're now in 2006, 2007, and the idea of making their own movies and making them out of their own studio, it starts to kind of coalesce around Iron Man. So now just to give you a sense of Iron Man's history, Iron Man, there was an attempt to make an Iron Man movie. I think in 1990, Universal had the rights to Iron Man, and they were going to make kind of a lower budget thing at that time. And then 20th Century Fox gets Iron Man in the late 90s. Nicolas Cage was thinking about making Iron Man. 98, Tom Cruise was thinking about doing it. And it's this kind of the situation where they start to kind of work on the movie and it kind of fades away, or it doesn't work out. Somebody sells the rights to somebody else, right? So, Fox sells the rights to New Line Cinema. Then New Line Cinema has it. They start working on a project. They were considering to have Joss Whedon direct that movie that they had in mind in like 2000. So, they were going to probably try to cash in a little bit on what Marvel was doing at that time. So then. I think it's 06, they get the rights back. 05, I guess, something like that. They get the rights back when New Line's not able to do anything with the property. It comes back to them, so they're able to start that process, and so they had originally thought when they were making the movie they were going to maybe kind of reference that mention about Stark Industries and Spider-Man 2, but they decided to just kind of start from scratch. There were some challenges, of course, with Iron Man. I think the biggest challenge is that he's not as big of a deal, right, as Spider-Man. Hulk is probably another one of the biggest ones for Marvel. I mean, I know for me growing up, you'd see Iron Man in the Avengers, and that would be one thing, when you're looking at comic books, but from an actual comic book, standalone comic book, it wasn't one that I really read. Wasn't one that a lot of people I knew really read. Nobody was really like, the only person I knew who was a huge Iron Man fan was rapper Ghostface Killah, right, from Wu-Tang, right? He called himself Iron Man, and he would, had his whole like other persona, right, as Tony Stark, Iron Man. That's the only person I knew who was a huge Iron Man fan. Not many people that I knew were as big on him. And so they looked at that and said, okay, let's, see if we can make him as popular as, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Captain America, or whoever. And they started kind of conducting focus groups to take a look at, what they would do. How could they make the character more human, for example, because he's behind all this armor? What are some things they could do to make people more interested in him? They tapped Jon Favreau to make the film, and that's when they start looking at who are they going to have play the role. And again, we had talked in the past, Nicolas Cage, Tom Cruise were thinking about it, but Favreau looked at Robert Downey Jr. and thought, okay, let's have him do the role, and it's. All of it works out, right? All of it really comes together to make something where you get Marvel's second Superman, I think, right? I think, or their second, Batman, their second game changer kind of a comic book movie here with Iron Man. So I'm going to quickly get into the plot here, and then, we'll talk about what it is that I like about it and what its legacy is, and sort of, how it really changed the game for Marvel. So the plot is Robert Downey Jr., he plays Tony Stark. He's the son of Henry Stark, who owned Stark Industries. Robert Downey Jr. He's like a genius. So he's designing things, but he's also the CEO. He's an international playboy. Women love him. He goes out to Afghanistan to test some new weapons, and his convoy gets attacked, and he's captured by I don't know. I don't know if they were Afghani freedom fighters. I'm not sure, or they were Taliban, but they were, some sort of offshoot of them that they capture him, and they force him to make weapons for them. And when they think he's making them weapons, he actually designs a prototype of the Iron Man suit, and he escapes. So then there was a doctor who got him, nursed him to health when he was blown up by he was injured by one of his own weapons, and the weapon had like these sort of, I guess, like these nano things, or I don't know exactly what they were, but they were attacking his heart. And the guy hooked up a magnet to a car battery so that it would keep the nano things away from his heart to keep him alive. So anyway, that guy tells him, hey, if you get out of this alive, you need to stop being Mr. Merchant of Death and selling your weapons to people to kill each other with. You need to promote peace, right? You need to change all that. So he does escape, and he, makes an announcement that, from that day forward, Stark Industries is not going to be creating weapons, right? We're going to be, designing new things. And then he just sort of locks himself away to design the Iron Man suit. At the same time, his fellow business person, a guy named Obadiah Stane, which is a fantastic name. I remember watching the Riff Tracks version of this, and there's a scene where Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Tony Stark, is talking to him through a video chat, and like Obadiah Stane's got like no shirt on in bed, and Mike Nelson's like, I don't really need to see someone named Obadiah Stane with no shirt on talking from his bed, right? That's not what I'm coming to a movie for. But anyway, he starts kind of working behind the scenes to sort of freeze or get Stark out, but actually really he's more of an evil guy who's, he's trying to plan his own like Iron Man suit, and they end up having a big clash at the end. They fight, and that's it. There are some other things that happen in the film, right? We've got Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, his Stark's assistant. They have a very kind of cool, like, 40s, 50s screwball comedy, will they or won't they kind of thing back and forth. We find out after the fact that a lot of the dialogue in the script wasn't written. The script really wasn't finished before they started shooting. So a lot of the dialogue, Robert Downey Jr. was ad-libbing it, and Gwyneth Paltrow was just kind of just doing her best with what he was giving her. And she even said after the fact that she had trouble keeping up with him. But I think, Gwyneth Paltrow, right? We kill Gwyneth Paltrow all the time for Goop and for all the kind of stuff that she posts and talks about and stuff like that. And one of the stories was they went to a yoga place, and she told the woman like that she only had her job because Gwyneth Paltrow made everybody want to like yoga again. It was like stuff like that. So it's sort of the insufferable things. But the character she plays here in Iron Man actually has a lot of humanity, right? And does a really fantastic job opposite Robert Downey Jr. I think it's the big thing about this movie. I mean, why this movie works, and maybe that's where this is a good place to take this. I mean, why did I like this one so much? Because watching it again for this, I was reminded of how much I liked it. It kind of really does a great job of splitting the difference between the human side of the superhero and the superhero part of it. I think that's an important piece of it. I think they focus grouped, right, to get a sense of like what people would want from an Iron Man movie. Jon Favreau really delivered that, and of course, Robert Downey Jr.'s performance is just completely hits it out of the park. But it also, I got that sense when I was watching it that they were not making like some kind of big tent, like let's try to make $1 billion kind of thing. They were trying to make the best possible comic book movie that they could make, and I'm curious. As we kind of go through these, I mean, of course, we're only going to be doing Marvel, we're only going to be doing Phase 1, so we're not going to get into all of the Marvel films. And we know that this was a really rough year for Marvel in terms of their movies. I think only the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie did anything, or did well enough in the box office. So they had two other duds, right, with the Ant-Man movie and with the Marvels in terms of just, performance at the box office. I was comparing this to the Marvels, which I did see in the theater, and I don't know if the Marvels misses this one by that much, right? But where it misses it in some key spots is that the Marvels is trying its hardest to be this big tent thing to just get everybody involved. There was a sense that it was like almost like they had to include certain things, or they had to, I mean, the whole thing with the multiverse, that they, having to like fit all of that multiverse stuff in. This movie doesn't have any of that, right? This is just strictly about Iron Man. They introduce Shield, of course, but it's really just about who is Iron Man, what is he doing, and he saves the day, but also what is it about him? Like he goes through his own metamorphosis, and they focus. Or they do a really good job of focusing on both at the same time, that we get the comic book superhero aspect while we're also getting the human aspect. Yeah, I mean, and of course, when we get into, we'll talk about the Hulk here in a bit and sort of how that kind of continues that. But, there are a few other things I think that happen here that I think are important. Robert Downey Jr.'s character, he ad-libbed the scene where he says, "I'm Iron Man," right? At the end of the movie. But, Kevin Feige, I think that's how you say his name, Kevin Feige, he and Avi Arad, they just decided to go with it. And they said, fine. And so essentially, none of the characters have secret identities. Except for, I guess, Spider-Man, I think, kind of still goes by Peter Parker in the Sony films. But for the most part, right, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there are no secret identities, right? Everybody is who everybody knows everybody as who their superhero counterpart is. I think that's a really cool thing that they kind of went with that there. Again, like for example, like Brie Larson as a star, I think she could be. I mean, I saw her, obviously in Captain Marvel, she was a solid enough lead to kind of lead the film the way that you'd want, the same way that Robert Downey Jr. led the film this way. I think having three Marvels, right, it was a little bit harder for her to kind of find her space in there. And the way the film was written, it almost like it would touch on places to give her that space to kind of continue to grow as a character. But then they would also have to pull back because we had other characters that needed to grow. With this film, it's really just about getting, Iron Man. We're able to iris in on him and focus on his story. And again, Robert Downey Jr. just delivers it on so many different ways, right? I mean, he's a compelling hero, someone that we want to root for and see succeed. He's also hilarious, right? And the ad-lib scenes were funny. The way he talks is funny. The way he is like sort of this like, late 2000s bro character, talking about what, Maxim magazine cover women that he slept with and all that kind of stuff, and then he sort of changes into not being so much that person anymore. He's very changed by what happens to him when he's in captivity, which I think is important. The movie does a really great. It's not that he just wants to get out and get revenge on the people who wronged him, right? He wants to he wants to grow and be a better person. From a special effects part, I mean, it was all good enough, right? I think, it all worked, right? It was all believable. It all looked nice. Again, you get the funny moments there that also, were funny. And I think the thing is, I guess, with the funny moments is they were funny in a way that wasn't like hit you over the head with it, which is odd, right? Odd to say, because like there's like this scene where he tries to lift himself up with his thrusters and he falls, right? He ends up like crashing, and then like the robot like hoses him down with like the fire extinguisher, and it's like just kind of deadpan the way it happens, but it's a little bit also a slapstick in the fact that he's like just like shooting himself all over the place and running into things. But yeah, so this is the movie, right, that sort of announces Marvel Studios' presence. Now, of course, some things to keep in mind: it wasn't distributed by Disney at this point. It was distributed by Paramount, and they, eventually when Disney bought out Marvel Studios, Disney got the rights to Iron Man there from Paramount. The same thing doesn't happen with Incredible Hulk, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But so again, this is also the very early stages of the Marvel Studios, right? We're not quite into the point where Disney has taken over this stuff yet. And so when Disney buys it, that could be part of it, right? That could be something that we talk about that maybe, and I don't know, I don't know if we'll get that far into it, but that, Disney's always looking for these big $10 billion successes, and Iron Man's not trying to be that. The other thing to keep in mind about Iron Man, right, is Iron Man comes out in 2008, right? And so that's the year The Dark Knight comes out. And I think that's a real fascinating piece of this as well, because the way DC had been going in from the 90s into the 2000s, right? That like they fall off in the late 90s with the Schumacher Batmans that weren't as well received as the two Tim Burton ones. Then for whatever reason, they make that Catwoman movie in 2004, right? Nobody really knows what's going on there. I mean, again, DC was just kind of all at sea at that time. They're killing Superman. We're bringing him back. We're breaking Batman's back. We're bringing him back. And then you get Batman Begins in, I think it was '05 was Batman Begins. So essentially the year after Catwoman. And I think, Batman, it needed a win, right? They needed a win really bad. And of course they had two things going on at the same time, right? They had Batman Begins in '05, and then they were also trying to bring Superman back. And Superman Returns is an interesting one because Batman Begins, right, that's rebooting the Batman the Batman story, right? This is something completely different from the Schumacher. Whereas Superman Returns was almost like a do-over for Part 3, right? They kind of knew the damage they did to the Superman brand with Part 3. They were trying to redo it. And that one doesn't work as well, right? I mean, as Batman Begins does well enough, but it's '08, right, when The Dark Knight comes out. And I think the thing that sold The Dark Knight, the thing that made The Dark Knight so good, I mean, I remember at the time, I hadn't seen The Dark Knight yet, and I remember my friend telling me like, oh, I'm sorry, before that, I remember everybody talking about how great it was. Everybody loved The Dark Knight. Everybody thought it was like the best comic book movie ever made, which to me sounded crazy because I was just thinking about, again, Batman Returns, I think to that point was probably one of mine that I thought was the best. Again, Superman 2 was a really solid one, or sorry, Spider-Man 2, the original Superman. The fact that The Dark Knight, people were saying that this is the better one, I was like, okay, I've really got to see this. And I was kind of just taking it for granted that it was that good. And I remember my friend Ian, I brought it up to him, and he's like, that's not that good. And I was like, what do you mean it's not that good? Really? And he wasn't saying it in this contrarian way, like this kind of like, well, everybody else likes it, so I'm not going to like it. He was like, yeah, I don't know what the hype is. You watch it, you'll know what I mean. And I did, and I was like, yeah. I mean, Heath Ledger is fantastic in it. I think there was a lot of buzz about his performance, especially with him, dying tragically right before the film comes out. And so I think that was a big piece of it. But from a movie standpoint, yeah, it kind of was something that just sort of fed off that buzz. It wasn't anything spectacular to me. It wasn't anything that was anything groundbreaking. And I don't know, and I think it's interesting because it's the movie in '08, right, that almost makes $1 billion, right? It's the one that wins the Oscars. And granted, Heath Ledger, I mean, I think he more deserved the Oscar for Brokeback Mountain. I thought he had a better performance there than he does in Batman, but I think he deserved an Oscar. And so if you're going to give it to him for Dark Knight, yeah, he definitely deserved one at some point. Again, if he wasn't going to get it for Brokeback Mountain, I was glad he got it, even though it was posthumous, that he wasn't alive for it. But that's the movie that wins the Oscars. That's the one that's grossing all of that money. But, you look at where DC goes after that, right? And again, I know a lot of people are big fans of Dark Knight Rises in 2012. But, I mean, really, the Watchmen movie, Jonah Hex, Green Lantern, they're all kind of okay, but they're not like groundbreaking. They're not like changing the game in any kind of way. And of course, at the same time that you've got Dark Knight Rises, right, there's also this talk about this Batman versus Superman Dawn of Justice kind of thing. And it was sort of coming out like kind of in the late, the early 2010s that they were thinking about doing that. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the first time I think that DC is more chasing Marvel than Marvel is chasing DC, but there was a real possibility that it was going to go the other way, right? That DC was going to bring it back, right? Because the Dark Knight had that capability of being the thing that was going to bring DC back, and so now it's DC that sets the game, right? That just like DC set the game in the late 70s, in the late 80s, now in the late 2000s they were going to change it, and Marvel coming out with Iron Man the way it did, and for Iron Man to be so successful and to follow it up with successes after that like they did, to really build this universe the way that they did, to really change the way, because again, the one thing about The Dark Knight, right, is that it was always going to have a limitation. It was only going to be, first off, I mean, I don't think you were ever going to get better than The Dark Knight, right? And so The Dark Knight Returns, it's I don't know what to say about The Dark Knight Returns. For me, that movie just is kind of just like, it's just kind of ridiculous the way they go with it, where it's like, like Gotham is like taken over and like the cops are being like stuck in like a bunker for 8 months or a year or whatever it is. I don't know. And I mean, Dark Knight Rises did. I'm sorry, I called it Dark Knight Returns. Dark Knight Rises, it does do well, right? It does over $1 billion, but Avengers, does over, it does almost a half a billion more than it, right? I mean, it's you see by 2012, right? When we finish up this Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marvel has taken over completely. They have asserted their dominance in the comic book movie world, and DC's been struggling to get it back ever since. They've had a few like moments, right? Obviously, the first Aquaman movie pulled in a really good amount of money. People are, the Joker film did really well. So they've had these gasps here or there, but if Marvel doesn't make this decision, and it was the right move and it was the right gamble on their part to take their movies and take their properties from these other companies that were making them and say, we want to do this, we're going to do this one the way we think we should make the movie. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what kind of happens. Like if you don't get Iron Man in 2008 to sort of set the wheels in motion here, so that by the time we hit 2012, Avengers is doing a $500 million more than the third Dark Knight movie after in 2008, right? It was the other way around, right? In the 2008, it was the Dark Knight that was doing a $500 million more than Iron Man. If they hadn't made that decision, and they hadn't gotten it right, and they got it right, that's the other piece of this, is that they had to get it right, but they did. They had all the right people involved, and they got it right. And it's amazing to go back all these years. It's now been 15 years, almost 16 years since this movie came out, but to watch it again, like I have here, and see, that it holds up. That I'm seeing all the moments where they got it right and being like, yeah, I really am enjoying this movie. I think it's part of the reason why I wanted to do this, why I wanted to look at these movies again, because of Iron Man in particular, and sort of how it changed the game. Because once Marvel takes over and then Disney buys Marvel, right, that really, really sets the stage where we start to get to this point where we start getting, the end of the by the end of Phase 3, Marvel is head and shoulders above kind of everything at that point. You get some Star Wars movies here and there, you get some other ones. And of course, now we're here in 2023 where Marvel's struggling, right? Where, you've got Barbie and Oppenheimer and Super Mario that are all, outperforming Marvel movies. But this is the movie that starts what would, think of like as like, a good 10, 20, 10 to not quite 15 year period of dominance from Marvel. Iron Man, it starts the wheels in motion for what we end up seeing there. So, yeah, I think that's, probably a really great place to leave this. But I think, having Disney Plus and being able to watch a movie like this again, I think it's, it's with all the things that were going on with Marvel this year, with their having movies that didn't perform as well, and, and all the TV shows and all this other stuff, to see where it started and seeing how it started with Iron Man and how great and how well they, what a good job they did with that movie. I think it was a lot of fun to watch that here. And so it's going to be interesting as we go through the rest of the movies. I mean, we're going to take a break here. We're going to talk about Incredible Hulk and sort of where that one went. But it's going to be interesting because as we go through these films, as we go through the Marvel Cinematic Universe here, we're going to see as Marvel starts to really start to assert themselves here and build on the success of both Iron Man and then Incredible Hulk, which comes out later that year. And of course, there are other things we'll be able to talk about with Incredible Hulk. That some of the things that make Incredible Hulk a little bit trickier than Iron Man when it came to making sequels and all of that. So why don't we do that? We'll take a break here and we'll come back and we will talk about the Incredible Hulk. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and now we're going to look at The Incredible Hulk, which I didn't realize this, but I actually reviewed this on the site for when I used to do wildcard reviews. I reviewed Ang Lee's Hulk, right, because I felt like I had to review that one, because I was doing kind of like, I don't want to say bad comic book movies. There were comic movies that didn't do so hot. I did Ang Lee's Hulk then, and then I thought I would do the newer one at that time, The Incredible Hulk. It sort of compared the two. So I actually do have written reviews of both of those films. One of the things I think, one of the ways my Incredible Hulk review didn't hold up compared to now, or like, thinking about it, how it's aged or not. I made cracks about Liv Tyler not being great as a scientist. Maybe that's still the case, but I think when we talk about the movie, I think her interplay with Ed Norton and sort of the way she played that role of someone who's in love with somebody who disappeared, comes back, she finally has him in her life again, and doesn't want to lose him again. I think she played that part really, really well and gave the whole piece a lot of humanity. So that's one area where I think I would differ from my review that I wrote in the late 2000s. Older me now, who's married, been married for almost 10 years, kind of sees that part a little bit differently than young 20-something Matt, young late 20s Matt, who was a bachelor. I don't know about swinging bachelor, but I was a bachelor at that time. Probably didn't understand that part and what she was playing quite to the same degree. All right. Anyway, so let's get in a little bit on this one as well, because the difference between the Hulk and Iron Man, of course, is that the Hulk is one of Marvel's biggest properties, right? When you think of sort of their top 4 or 5, right? The Hulk's got to be there. I think, Spider-Man's probably number 1. Captain America kind of in and out on that one in terms of how people feel about Captain America. And I'm giving this list kind of pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe, because post, Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean, one of the lasting legacies that maybe I should have mentioned in the previous segment, one of the lasting legacies of Iron Man from that 2008 movie, the first MCU one, is that they make Iron Man into one of the number 1 Marvel properties, right? They turn Iron Man into Spider-Man, the Hulk. I'm trying to think of something like Wolverine, right? Wolverine would be another big one. It's interesting that Deadpool has kind of grown into being close on that level as one of their top ones. But the Iron Man movie makes Iron Man one of those names, right? He's, whenever, as a kid growing up, whenever you see Avengers, you'd see Iron Man. But a lot of times it would be like Iron Man and maybe Hawkeye and like they would kind of be mixed in, but like Hulk would have his own sticker, right? Or Spider-Man would have his own sticker, right? Captain America would have his own sticker, whereas Iron Man didn't always have his own sticker, right? Just thinking about like those sticker sets and things like that, or toys, right? That there might be 3 versions of the Hulk or 3 versions of Spider-Man, but you'd get one Iron Man. Now Iron Man is that level, right? Iron Man is Wolverine, he is Hulk, he is Spider-Man. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But the fact that they start with Iron Man as a more obscure Marvel character that they make into that level, but then they also, for their second one, they have the Hulk, who already was at that level. Thinking about where the Hulk comes in, for me as a fan, there's kind of 2 big things I think with the Hulk for me that stood out, kind of my influences as a comic book fan. Of course, the TV show. The TV show, again, I was young for it when it was airing new, but I would come home from school and it would be on. And it was a very different kind of comic book show, because it did feel, whereas The Amazing Spider-Man was kind of more like a detective drama, there was a detective element to this, but it's also, again, like The Fugitive. He's traveling from town to town. There was an element of humanity where you'd feel bad for Bill Bixby, but then also as a kid, I always loved the idea of like you'd always be excited for that moment where he'd be like, "Don't make me mad," but they would. Whoever the baddies were, they would make him mad, and he would just turn into the Hulk. Lou Ferrigno, and he'd start throwing people around. I think even just from an effects standpoint, Lou Ferrigno with the makeup that they used for him, it really kind of solidified that's who the Hulk is. Lou Ferrigno became this definitive Hulk, which I think it's another thing that Iron Man. It was like a positive and a negative for Iron Man, right? Because on the negative side, right, there was nothing for people to latch onto when they saw Iron Man to say like, okay, this is what I'm used to with Iron Man. This is what I know of Iron Man. I can anchor into that and then experience this and compare it and like it or not like it compared to that. On the other hand, because there wasn't that history there, Robert Downey Jr., Jon Favreau and company, they could make Iron Man what they wanted to make Iron Man. And it just was, of course, there's a lot of pressure on that. Like, you've got to be successful, but they pulled it off and made him into something that now has become extremely iconic and something that we associate as, we kind of think of that's who Marvel is, right? Same thing too with what they do with Nick Fury as we kind of go along here with these MCU movies. Nick Fury, of course, was one character, right? He was an old white guy. I remember he was played by David Hasselhoff in the TV movie that was supposed to be, it was another failed pilot, another failed TV show that didn't happen. And then they cast Nick Fury. They cast Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, and he's become the definitive Nick Fury. That's who we think of as Nick Fury. And again, they've made Nick Fury into again one of the top Marvel characters. That's sort of again taking more obscure characters and sort of making them really defining who they are in the zeitgeist. The Incredible Hulk had already been well defined in the zeitgeist. And again, Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, they had made this sort of David Banner Incredible Hulk. They'd really, really shaped that for me as a kid growing up watching that show. So that was one big piece of it. The other thing is I remember as a kid collecting comics in the late 80s, early 90s, going to the flea market. So in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, there's a flea market. I believe that flea market is either now a Walmart or it's the parking lot for the Walmart. I can't remember one or the other, but you go to the flea market. It was always a thing, like on a Saturday or Sunday. It would be Sundays. My parents would go grocery shopping. And they would drop my sister and I off at the flea market, and I'd have my $10 bill for my allowance, and I would go to the different stands. And I think about myself being between like 10 and 12 years old and interacting with these old men who were selling comics and haggling with them and stuff like that. Like, it just seems like such a wacky concept, right? That like, what parent nowadays would let their 10-year-old haggle? Not even just let their 10-year-old haggle with an old comic book salesperson, right? But they would just drop their kid off in that den of, I don't say den of iniquity, but like in that sort of like this bizarre, this like commerce, like this, sort of, I don't know, bizarre. I'm thinking like maybe like some air bizarre, like an old movie or something. But you'd be there, and I remember I didn't have a lot of money, and I remember there was a Magnus Robot Fighter #1 there. One of the comic book sellers was like, "Hey, look at this," and I was like, "I can't afford it." And he's like, and he was like trying to taunt me with it, and he's like, "Oh, come on, you really want to get this?" And I'm like, "You don't understand. Like, and I didn't say this to him, of course, but looking back on it now, it's like I don't have credit card, right? I don't have plastic. I don't have any way to like buy this and pay you for it later. I've got what my allowance is, right? I've got the money that I made for cleaning up the house and watching my younger siblings and all whatever crap that you do, right? I don't like haggling with you about Magnus Robot Fighter, but anyway, all that to say, so I'd go to these different stands and I'd kind of see what they had and pick out what I could. I wasn't usually getting a lot of back issues, right? Because again, I only had $10, so it was a lot of times it was more newer ones because they were cheaper, right? The back issues usually cost more. But I remember being at this one stand that was actually a younger guy who ran that stand. And I remember a woman was there with her mother, and she was looking through the Hulk comics, and she was picking them out for her husband. And I remember she was like, "Oh, I think he needs this one or he needs this one." And it was this idea of like, wow, he's got almost every Hulk comic book, right? From the 1960s through till the the late 80s, early 90s when I was collecting. He had almost every one, and his wife, he sent it, for I think it was either Christmas or his birthday that she was looking for this. But this idea that like his wife would be going into the store like with a list of like a small number of titles that he needed, and trying to find them. The idea just sounded so amazing to me, right? That you could collect comics and potentially have them all like that. Now, of course, I had a few that I'd collected all of, like X-Force, Deadpool, things like that. I remember Deadpool, when I got back from college in the early 2000s, was working or whatever, I had a little extra money and I just bought up all the Deadpools. And then I moved back in with my parents, I had some health issues, and then before I moved out, I kind of had a bunch of stuff in storage in the basement, and those Deadpools were sitting in the basement. My dad kept them. He was like, "Oh, I got your comics still for you," but they've got to be in the worst shape possible. So that was like the closest thing. But Deadpool, that's like a however many year run. I mean, they go like 100 something issues, right? I mean, you're talking about like almost 30 years of Hulk, right? 25 plus at that point is what it would have been probably, that this guy had all of them except for a few. And I just remember that always standing out for me. Whenever I see something about the Hulk, or I think about the Hulk comes up, I think of that moment. Because I think for me as a collector of anything, just the idea of collecting things is always something that has impressed me. And when people have complete collections of things, that's always impressed me. I'm sort of changing just because, we live in a small apartment and I can't afford to collect things. Or we don't have the space to collect things is what I should say. So I'm kind of more in the mindset of collecting experiences. Like, how many baseball parks can I go to? How many, basketball arenas, how many states can I visit, those kinds of things. I'm kind of more about collecting experiences. Like even here in Philadelphia, I know it's Starbucks, with the whole union busting thing, it's not a great thing. But one of the things I did when I first moved here was I would go to different Starbucks to try to learn the city, to try to see different parts of the city. So it's almost like I'm collecting Starbucks, right? I'm collecting a different Starbucks by going to a different place. But also I was experiencing more of the city by that. But like, okay, I've never been to that Starbucks before, and let me take this route to get there so I'll see these streets. So yeah, the collecting thing has always been a thing for me. I've just always, I don't know. I remember collecting Garbage Pail Kids and baseball cards and stuff like that. But the comic book thing, I don't know. There's something about that, and that's always galvanized a piece for me about collecting comic books. Was that guy, his wife and mother there, or not his wife and mother-in-law. It was her mother. Walking around the flea market, but then like going through the box and and picking out the whatever Hulk, finding one and being like, oh, he needs this one. It was expensive too. I mean, it was one from the 60s. It was probably like $30 or $40. I don't remember what it would have been at that time, but it was a sizable number. Definitely a lot more than my allowance would have done. But yeah, I just, I remember I used to go through the Wizards and be like, what one could I collect all of? Like what ones are cheap enough? I remember Silver Surfer, because Silver Surfer is my favorite. Silver Surfer is like, of all the comic book heroes, Silver Surfer is by far my favorite one. I was not a big fan of the way he was depicted in the Fantastic Four movie, but also I really didn't like the fact that he was left out of the Infinity War Avengers movies. We'll get into that a little bit because, again, that's, it wasn't really like it was Disney's fault that they couldn't put him in, or Marvel's fault that they couldn't put him in those movies, but he was such a huge part of the Infinity War movies, and it just, yeah, anyway. But yeah, so like I remember thinking about that with Silver Surfer, was collecting all of his comics, and I still love the idea of doing that. It's just I would have no place to put them, and eventually they would just, they would fall apart and they wouldn't be any good. So okay, so getting back to the Incredible Hulk, that's our first Incredible Hulk live action incantation, and it still stands up, I think, is with all of these Marvel series, but I haven't seen a lot of these Disney Plus Marvel series. I did watch the Netflix ones, which I guess I was reading today. Those are not a part of canon, which whatever canon means or whatever that is. Those Defenders ones that were on Netflix, they were the characters. They're using the characters within Marvel, like the Daredevil and the Kingpin, but they actually don't. The stories, I guess, they don't think those stories count as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is whatever, I mean, when I was a kid collecting comic books, I mean, you'd see like Spider-Man and like, first off, he had 4 of his own comics, right? Those 4 comics were not like in sync with each other, right? He was fighting, the Hobgoblin in one issue, and he was fighting, Dr. Octopus in another, a lizard in another one, right? It wasn't like he was, they weren't like all trying to follow each other. They didn't all have to be connected. But anyway, I'm getting kind of way off track here. I mean, really, what I was trying to say was that, other than those Defenders series, I really like, for example, Luke Cage. That there's only 2 seasons of that, but that is, for anything that was done in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which again, this apparently doesn't count for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it was one of my favorite shows. But I think, the Incredible Hulk show from the late 70s, early 80s, it stands up as one of the best comic book TV shows, and I think, there's almost a sense of like, oh, we forget that these shows existed, because it's one is, I think, a big piece of it is that a lot of the people who, there are a lot of fans of Marvel stuff that were too young for the Hulk, because as I remember it, growing up in the 80s, it was on in reruns. But as you get into the 90s, it wasn't. I don't remember, like mid to late 90s, I don't think it was on in rerun syndication at all. And definitely not in the 2000s. I mean, now, I think if you're a younger person out here and you're listening to me chatting about this, and I know according to our numbers, we do have younger people that do listen. I believe the Incredible Hulk TV series and even the TV movies, they're on they're on Tubi now. So you can definitely check those out. Now, one of the things, of course, that does stand out as an issue with the old series is that he didn't fight any of the standard baddies, right? That we know from the Incredible Hulk. It's not like the Incredible Hulk had like the best villains gallery. I mean, we get to see some of that villains gallery when we talk about the movie here coming up, the Incredible Hulk here coming up. But I think that kind of plays into a little bit, or it sort of helps the Incredible Hulk a little bit, because there isn't a villains gallery that we're missing, right? Like people weren't clamoring for the Abomination or a Leader or whoever else that the Incredible Hulk fought, right? And in that sense, right, it was kind of the show, again, it was kind of a different feel to it. It was almost like, you as a kid especially, wanting to see like the bad guys get theirs, and see the Incredible Hulk come in and just sort of take out these bad guys. It was a huge thing. But then at the same time, you had Bill Bixby really humanizing the Bruce Banner piece there, and he really got into that role. I mean, again, those TV movies that come out in the 80s, that's really him driving those. He was trying to really kind of bring the Incredible Hulk back. There was talk, of course, in those TV movies, right? He works with Thor and Daredevil. There was also talk because the series was running at the same time as the Amazing Spider-Man series, about trying to bring those two together. And I can't remember why. It was, again, probably something to do with studios or something like that, or budget. It's whatever the reasons were. I think maybe two different studios one did Spider-Man and one did Incredible Hulk, even though they were both being done for CBS. I don't know what the deal was, but for whatever reason, they couldn't make that happen, which would have been really cool. I mean, the coolest, of course, with the Incredible Hulk, right, was that Wolverine got his first appearance in an Incredible Hulk issue, which is, one of the more fantastic things, right? I mean, it's, thinking about Wolverine and Incredible Hulk fighting and that kind of thing. I mean, that would have, having him in one of these movies would have been really great. But anyway, so, we've got the TV show that really establishes who the Incredible Hulk is. And when Marvel, starts sort of making those movies in the early 2000s, right? And you think about that time period there, when, they're just sort of, they've just made Spider-Man, right? And it's become a huge success, right? They've put out X-Men, Daredevil, and of course Hulk comes out at that same time in 2003. Universal Pictures has the rights to distribute Hulk, and so they make the movie. Ang Lee directs it, which Ang Lee is one of my favorite directors. I love Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, The Wedding Party. I think it was a Wedding Banquet. He's done a lot of movies that I've been a huge fan of, and so. It does kind of pain me to say that I don't like the 2003 Hulk. I know a lot of people talked about it, like saying, "Oh no, it's actually pretty good. Like you should, yeah." So I kind of went back to my review of it, and also went back to just sort of, I don't know, my thoughts on that film, and just kind of looked at it again for this. And I think there are a few things, of course. I mean, the biggest thing, of course, is just the Hulk himself, right? And this is probably something where the newest movie doesn't have to, how do I say it? It doesn't have to contend with this as much, as because this was the first version of the Hulk that we had coming out of the coming out of this, so this renaissance of this sort of early 2000s Marvel renaissance, where they're making X-Men, they're making Spider-Man. So it was only a matter of time, right, before they made the Hulk, but it was the first time we were seeing him not as Lou Ferrigno, not as Bruce Bixby. And so I don't know that Ang Lee fully got, I mean, he would have been old enough to have seen the show, so I'm sure he would have probably gotten it, but I don't think he fully appreciated what we were looking for from an Incredible Hulk movie. So when this movie comes out, I mean, I don't know the way I'd describe the Incredible Hulk. I described him as like a doughy tool bag. That's how I described how he looked. But the way I described him in the review, I think this sums him up the best. It was like when you're in college and you go to a frat party or fraternity party or any kind of, something like that, there's always this big beefy guy. And just think of like, as I describe him, like a white guy with like kind of dirty blonde hair who's like big with like beady eyes and maybe a goatee, maybe not a goatee. And his whole raison d'etre is to smash things and break things and cause, and be like this big rough gruff person, and so he drinks and maybe smashes beer cans against his head, he throws things, he gets people into headlocks, he swears a lot, all that kind of stuff. That was the Hulk that Ang Lee created, that from what I saw. I just saw a dude like just causing issues at parties and being like, okay, do I even want to be around this guy? And then of course the next day, right, bragging about what he broke, like, yeah, man, I totally broke that thing, or totally, whatever. That was what the Hulk was. Comparing that to Lou Ferrigno, right, which Lou Ferrigno is he's the Hulk, right? And I think at that time I was like, why did you even need to make him completely CGI if you couldn't, one, if you couldn't pull it off, right? But two, why couldn't you just gotten Lou Ferrigno or somebody big like that to just do that part again? And I think that was part of the deal. Is I think when you watch this movie, the Incredible Hulk one, I get why they made him CGI. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I think that's, I guess when you have a director that you really, really love, and I think, one of the interesting things, I was listening to Bill Simmons recently. He was talking about David Fincher, right, who just had that movie come out with Michael Fassbender. And he was like, oh, he's got to be like one of our top 3 directors, right? And I was trying to think who you would have had as his other 2. I'm sure Scorsese would have been one. I don't know if maybe Spielberg or whoever. But, I mean, Ang Lee, right? Ang Lee, for me, is definitely a more accomplished director than David Fincher, I think. Again, The Wedding Banquet, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Brokeback Mountain, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, even something like A Lust Caution, that's a little bit kind of lower down there, but, Life of Pi. He's up there as one of the greats. So the fact that this one, it was the Hulk movie and it didn't work for me, and I think he's one of my favorite directors, and I really love him. It is hard for me. It's hard for me to really kind of to be here crushing. I mean, The Ice Storm is another one he did. It's like he's so many great movies. I don't know. I mean, I guess like what The Incredible Hulk would have had to work, for it to work for me, right? Would have been. Well, I mean, you could say, right, one of the things would have been like if it was like, he was like a, but old Chinese father and his daughters were coming home to visit him, and one of them was making him dinner or something like that, right? But right, the Hulk had a gay lover, and but his parents were coming to visit, his Chinese parents, and they didn't know he was gay, right? I don't know, but the other issues with that movie, I think one, Eric Bana was too slick to be Bruce Banner. And that's one area where Edward Norton gets it more right, and Bill Bixby got it right. Like Bill Bixby in particular, even though he was definitely a good-looking guy and was a movie star, he played that part as he made sure that he was not a completely meek scientist, right? But he was a scientist, right? He wasn't a big leading man kind of guy. Eric Bana is just, he's debonair leading man guy, right? And so that's the first piece, is I don't think he fits his Banner, right? You got to have someone who's a little bit more, I don't know if meek is the right word, but definitely a little bit more what's the term I want? Not educational, like scholastic, maybe scholarly, I guess. Maybe that's what So we've got a bad Hulk and we've got a bad Bruce Banner, and then I think that's maybe another piece for Ang Lee, right? Is that you think of like a Brokeback Mountain. Again, we were just talking about Heath Ledger. I mean, Brokeback Mountain, right? That's just such an amazing movie, and Heath Ledger is so amazing in it. I mean, Michelle Williams is amazing in it. I mean, just so many. I mean, that scene at the very end of that movie where he's there, an older Heath Ledger, which again, thinking about the movie Giant, right, where we got to see an older. James Dean, an older James Dean, right? They aged him in that. Seeing that with Heath Ledger, knowing that he wasn't going to live, another year, that he died, that he wasn't going to be living to old age like that. So we didn't know, right, at the time, of course, when they were making that scene, that he wasn't going to live to old age. But to see that scene and see him there, somehow as someone in his 20s to be able to play the part of an old dad with a grown-up daughter and play that part right, all of that stuff was just amazing. And you get none of that in this Hulk movie. And I don't know that you needed to have it, but all of it was just so kind of sauteed in wrong sauce. So Okay, so Universal has the distribution rights to the Hulk, but they didn't have, I guess, the creative rights. The creative rights reverted back to Marvel. And at the time, as we talked about with Iron Man, right, they needed distributors for their movies. So Paramount distributed Iron Man. It was okay, right, that Universal was going to distribute the Hulk. And this would end up being a problem for them later as we talk about, the situation with them. But, it worked out in this situation. So this Hulk that they make here, it's not a reboot, right? And I think there were some concerns there with that. I think that the director of this Hulk, Louis Leterrier, he really respected Ang Lee, which I get, right? Again, going back to Bill Simmons, right, with top 3 directors. I mean, I feel like Ang Lee's got to be in that category of, he's got to be on your short list of top 3 to top 5. Again, I still put him above David Fincher. I think that's, for me, with the body of work that I mean, and I'm not saying David Fincher is a bad director, right? I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just saying, like, Ang Lee, if you do the Pepsi challenge with their movies, I think Ang Lee is objectively has more more great movies, to his credit. That's just at the very least you can make a conversation. There's a conversation to be had, right, about who which one of those two would be top 3, right? Okay, so but yeah, Louis Leterrier, I think he talked about concerns about wanting to make a Hulk movie, knowing that Ang Lee had created one. It was like, essentially thinking about they're going to do a do-over or reboot for this. Is that something that they want to do? So. But he got on board. They got Ed Norton on board. Of course, Ed Norton started to kind of want changes. He wanted to kind of do some different things. One of the things, I think, he wanted the movie to be longer, which gives you a sense of where we're talking about with Edward Norton, right? That he's thinking the movie needed to be longer. Definitely, the movie did not need to be longer. It was an hour and 57 minutes. It was perfectly fine. But he wanted more about Bruce Banner and his relationship with Betty Ross. He wanted more of that in the film to make the film longer. Again, I don't know that we necessarily needed that. But the one thing that Norton does bring to it, along with Leterrier and with the script that we get here, and I believe, I don't know if Stanley, I think it's Zach Penn's script. I don't know if Stan Lee was, I don't know if he was in on that script. I don't know exactly how that worked. Like, I know he was involved with the creation of these movies. He was playing a part as producer and wanting to have an influence on them. But anyway, the script was really, really solid, and it did a really great job of marrying what I loved about the TV show. Which, again, just think about Ang Lee making the Hulk. Like, how did he not bring enough of that human element from the TV show, at least enough for it to work for me. This movie brings in more of that, right? And so. And I think Norton, he did some rewrites of the script to kind of, again, they were distancing it from the 2003 movie, but also I think he wanted more of the human element in it. And he pulls that part of it off. I think the human element that we get here is really good, with a good mix of when the Hulk comes into play at different parts, right? And I think that was really good. I mean, he gets what I think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were going for when they created the Hulk. I think that element is there, and this movie really kind of brings that. I mean, I think it's something that the TV show did as well, but the TV show, because of between the budgetary restrictions that it had and some of the other issues, it couldn't quite marry the two. The comic, it really had to diminish the comic book side. This movie does a great job of pulling in the comic book side while keeping the Bill Bixby human element in it. I don't like this movie as much as Iron Man. I don't think it's quite as good as Iron Man, but again, it has all of these pieces that I liked. I mean, Edward Norton, for all the issues that we're going to hear about after the fact with him, he gets Bruce Banner better. He gets that character better. I mean, he definitely pulls more from Bruce Bixby, I think, than Eric Bana was able to do. I don't think Eric Bana was really meant to be a Bruce Banner the way that Edward Norton really pulled it and does it. And it's interesting because there's also this part of him as being sort of this action hero where he's like, running away in foot chases and things like that. But even that, like, Norton pulls it off in a way that like it's not comfortable to Bruce Banner to be doing this stuff. Like he's developing it, he's understanding it that like, okay, if I'm on the run, I need to do certain things, I need to behave certain ways and handle certain things. But yeah, this thing, you know, it felt more authentic than the Ang Lee Hulk, which again, it's just so hard for me to say because I love Ang Lee so much that to say that I didn't like his movie. You know, in terms of the plot, I'll just go really quickly. They do a basic origin in flashback form at the very beginning while they're doing the credits. So it's just simply, you know, the accident that gives him the powers. He's the Hulk. He runs away and he flees to Rio de Janeiro, where he is learning to control his anger so he can't turn into the Hulk. He's working for a soda bottling plant. He's living in a favela, and he's just sort of trying to learn to control his body, and you know, he's learning martial arts. He's learning jujitsu, and so he's developing the side. At the same time, he's communicating with somebody back in New York about coming up with a cure for what he's going through, and he feels like he's close to getting there. Unfortunately, he has some. He cuts himself. Blood gets into one of the sodas. Stan Lee drinks the soda, and then they let William Hurt, who's playing Thunderbolt Ross, who is Betty Ross's dad. He's also the military guy who's tracking and wants to bring in Bruce Banner so he can make a whole army of Hulks. Right, that's his whole idea. So once he's found, he ends up escaping and then turning into the Hulk. He ends up kind of making his way back to New York. At the same time. Actually, before that, when he's found, Ross puts together a team of the best military guys to try to bring Norton in, and among that group is Tim Roth, who's playing the guy that ends up being the Abomination. I'm sorry, I drew a blank there, but it ends up being Abomination, and so that guy, he's there, and of course he sees like how. When the Hulk, becomes the Hulk, he realizes like, oh, I can't fight this guy alone. He starts taking like some kind of super soldier serum that they somehow have, and I guess I don't know if it's like the version of the one that Captain America has, but it's not perfected. It's not great, and so he takes that. He still gets like kind of crushed by Hulk when they have a confrontation in New York, and so that confrontation actually it's in Virginia. I'm sorry. Edward Norton makes his way to Virginia, finds Liv Tyler, who's Betty Ross. They reconnect, and at the same time, William Hurt discovers that his daughter has reconnected with Edward Norton, and he brings the troops back in. Another confrontation with the Hulk. He smashes them all, including Tim Roth, who he just completely obliterates. And Roth says, "Okay, I want more," and so I give him more kind of super soldier stuff. But really, what happens is when they meet up with that scientist in New York, is played by Tim Blake Nelson, character Samuel Stearns, who being the leader, which is like another Hulk, I think, villain who has like the big brain kind of thing. But anyway, Edward Norton's thinking this guy's going to help cure him, but actually no, he's been studying the gamma radiation particles and wants to kind of also bottle this for a variety of things, including being able to cure a disease, things like that. But anyway, they attack. William Hurt has his crew, including Tim Roth, go in and attack Norton, Tyler, and this guy, Samuel Stearns, the scientist, in his lab. Roth corners Stearns and says, "Hey, I want you to put this thing that Banner has. I want you to put it in me." And he does, and that turns him into Abomination. That leads to a huge confrontation that they have, and they kind of smash each other, and that's that. One of the things too, I forgot to mention at the end of Iron Man, we have the Stinger where we get. Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, right? We get that. At the end of this one, it's interesting. We get the Stinger here is we get Robert Downey Jr. meeting with William Hurt as General Thunderbolt Ross. And of course, Thunderbolt Ross, he becomes Red Hulk, I believe, right, in the comic books. But of course, we don't get any more Hulk movies after this, right? This is the only Hulk movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The reason for that is because what we were talking about earlier with Universal, right? Universal owns the rights, and unlike like Paramount, right, where they had the distribution rights for Iron Man, and then they reverted back to Disney when Disney bought Marvel Studios. Universal's a little bit different, right? Because Universal they kind of have a little bit of a thing with Disney, right? They have their Universal Studios, and Hulk is part of Universal Studios, right? There's Marvel characters that are at Universal Studios, and Disney wants their Marvel characters at their theme parks, right? The same way that you can do like a Star Wars thing at Disney, they want Marvel stuff at Disney as well. And the fact that Universal has it at their rival theme parks is an issue. And Universal's not so quick to give that up because they want to be able to have Hulk in their theme parks. I think I did the Hulk ride. I don't remember if I did. I went to Universal Studio once. My sister and I went. I remember to give you a sense of how long ago that was, like the late '90s. I had this Beastie Boys like Ringer T-shirt on. I remember the time. The reason why I remember is because one of the ones we went to, like a oil drum of water splashed down on the ride and it got all over me. So anyway, but no. So that means that this is the only Hulk movie that we get. The other thing, of course, is that Edward Norton, he's in talks with Marvel Studios about, one, they were talking about doing sequels. They've been talking about doing sequels this whole time. And there have been other issues that have come up in terms of like, putting those sequels together. But ultimately, from what I've read, the big thing is the Universal piece. But there are other things in terms of like, making these movies work, like what they wanted to do with the movies, like in terms of like producing them and all of that. But really, yeah, it's the Universal piece. But the other thing is Edward Norton, right? Because right now we have Mark Ruffalo as our Bruce Banner. So I don't know exactly how it worked. You get different conflicting reports about this, but whether it was Norton wanted more money, he wanted more creative control over the process of making Hulk, whatever it was, but he felt like, okay, well, you've got me here now. You're going to pay if you want me to be in Avengers or whatever the other movies. And they said, no, we're just going to cast Ruffalo instead, and that's what they did. And that's it, right? This is the only time we see Norton as a Hulk. And the interesting thing about this is that there's a lot of conversation now about what to do about Jonathan Majors, who they fired from Marvel. So he was supposed to be their main antagonist as Kang, right? And it didn't seem to be too much of an issue that they replaced Norton with Ruffalo. And, it's not like they had to retcon anything, right? It's not like Lucas went in and replaced all the images of Norton with Mark Ruffalo. I mean, maybe it's something that they would do. It's interesting with Ruffalo as Banner, because I have seen some of the depictions of him. Because the thing is, right, is that there's no more standalone Hulk movies because of what happened with Universal. We don't get any sequels. It's been 15 years, and there's no talks of another one coming. I don't know when the rights revert back. I don't know if they revert back in. I'm trying to think. So because Universal. So the thing about Universal, right? Universal is their Comcast, right? So Comcast, Universal, Fast and Furious movies, right? Those are Universal. And there was some talk because the other piece that Universal owns is Namor, the Submariner. And so, right, that's why we haven't seen a Submariner we haven't seen a Submariner movie, despite the fact that he's one of the big names, right, of Marvel. We've never seen him in a movie. We've seen him in a movie, right? He was in the most recent Black Panther movie, but he hasn't had a standalone film, right? Because again, Universal owns the rights to him, and they just kind of have parked him for however long. There was some talk because I guess Disney wanted to maybe sell off their stake in Hulu. So they own, I think, 67% of it, and then Comcast owns the other 33%. Because initially, right, the three big, I guess, what was it, ABC, Fox, and NBC, they each had a third of Hulu, and then Disney as ABC bought Fox's 33%. So then it was just Comcast. And I think they were talking about selling their 67% off to Comcast, and then part of the deal might be that they would get the rights back to Hulk and Namor, right? Which would be huge for them, right? To be able to make a Namor standalone movie. I think the other things, I think those rights are starting to come back. I want to say that their option. When does their option end? I'd read it somewhere, and I don't know where I'd read that their the option is coming to an end here soon. I think, is it? Oh, actually, it looks like actually they return in June 15th of 2023. So actually, they have the rights back. So maybe that's the plan, is to start doing more movies with him again. So that's kind of done now. So they now have the rights, and so because Yeah, I don't know. Again, all these things are kind of fugazi, right? Because it hurts our ability to enjoy these movies, right? Like, I mean, right now Marvel's got this huge thing that they have to contend with bringing the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and part of I think why the Marvels was so clunky is they have this stinger at the end, right, where it's like one of the characters gets sent to a different multiverse or whatever, a different universe in the multiverse, then that's the one that has the X-Men, and that's how they're going to bring them in, because they haven't been able to use the X-Men for so long. But now suddenly, because Disney bought out Fox, they have the rights to the X-Men. Also, same with the Fantastic Four, same with Silver Surfer. But it's always been part of the quagmire with these things, and that's one of the things that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was hoping to change by making the films themselves. Right, is that you can. We have the ability to say, okay, we're going to put the Hulk in these different movies and use him differently. So, but I think Disney didn't want to, the way that Marvel Studios at the time didn't mind having Hulk, having Universal have the rights to distribute because they needed a distributor. When Disney took over, they were the distributor, right? They're distributing their movies, and they didn't want to make a movie for Universal. And again, Sony, right? If you think about the Spider-Man movies, Sony has deals with Spider-Man to make those movies, and what was I going to say? So Sony is okay with sort of piggybacking on the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they aren't really in competition the way that Universal is with Disney for the theme parks and that kind of thing. So it adds another layer to it. But it again, it's part of, for us as comic book fans, I think it affects how these things happen, that we can't get another Hulk movie because Universal owns the rights and Disney doesn't want to do them a solid by making a movie for them that they can make a whole bunch of money off distributing, right? And I mean, probably what would happen, right, with that, it's interesting that the Incredible Hulk, I think, it's on Disney Plus, but I think you probably could also get it on Peacock, or Peacock would be able to have it as well. Disney didn't want to do them a solid, so they were like, well, we're not going to make another Hulk movie. We're just going to put Hulk in the other movies, right? We're going to put him in Thor Ragnarok or whatever that they put him in, and use him that way. So we don't get another standalone movie. This movie was setting up for future sequels. This definitely movie was made with sequels in mind, and it's a shame that we didn't get that. But yeah, so there's a couple other things I want to touch on before we wrap up here, and I know this one, it's interesting. This one went a lot longer than the it didn't. Iron Man went 52 minutes. Sorry, I was thinking that this was Iron Man went 25 minutes, but no. So we're definitely closing in on a good 2-hour deal here with this, but there's a couple of things I want to talk about. So this year, again, the big story this year has been the fact that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that the Marvel movies underperformed, right? And of course, I think of the movies, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 did okay, which Guardians of the Galaxy is another one like Iron Man, that was a book that was, when I was collecting comic books, nobody cared about Guardians of the Galaxy. Nobody was buying Guardians of the Galaxy. Right? That was one of those ones that would go through iterations where it was like, oh, hey, we're releasing Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy 1 is out now, and then like a year later, nobody bought it, and so they were like, yep, that's it. We're getting rid of Guardians of the Galaxy. Somehow, Marvel Cinematic Universe turns it into this thing where like Star-Lord and what Rocket and Groot, whatever, that they're these huge characters on par with like a Spider-Man, which is just impossible for me to fathom. And I don't, we're not going to get into Guardians of the Galaxy because that's not part of Marvel Phase 1, so we won't be talking about that. But it is, but anyway, that was the one that did well this year, right? That one did, I think, like $750 million or something like that. But we have other ones that they had trouble with. One of the things I noticed as I was going through these movies here, and just sort of getting a sense of just the history of Marvel movies in general. When you look at 2008, you get Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, right? And then Punisher Warzone, which was like a very limited release film with Ray Stevenson. I almost said Ray Wise. And I knew it wasn't Ray Wise because he's a completely different actor, right? But Ray Stevenson, as the Punisher, really fantastic movie. I really love this movie. It's not a sequel to the '04 one. It's sort of its own thing. I reviewed it for the site, so I think if it made $10 million, I'd be surprised. It didn't make a lot of money, but that's the only other movie that comes out from Marvel in 2008. And of course, right, the other big comic movie that year is The Dark Knight. But from a Marvel standpoint, right, you're just getting Iron Man and Incredible Hulk. They don't release anything in '09, right? You get X-Men Origins Wolverine, which another major dud, right? I mean, I don't know what they were thinking with Deadpool in that movie. But anyway, Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marvel Studios, they don't release anything that year. They come back in 2010 with with Iron Man. And then 2011, they have Thor and Captain America. And that's kind of the cadence that they're working with. 2012, we get Avengers. But they're kind of sticking with a movie or two a year, and then some years it's just the one. I shouldn't say that. They're starting out with just one or two a year, but in a lot of cases it's either just the one or they even take a year off, right? But they're not really flooding the market so much with stuff. So we start to get past the Avengers, right? Where the Avengers, that's the one that, when we finish up here, that's the one that really makes them a lot of money. Then it's like, okay, they can't do any less than 2 movies a year, right? So, you start working on that, on that way. And then, of course, at the same time, Fox is competing with them, and they're trying to put out their movies. Columbia, which becomes Sony, they're trying to make their Spider-Man movies. So the market's kind of flooded, but you're still not getting too much for Marvel Cinematic Universe. Starts to change 2018, we get 3 movies, right? We get Black Panther, Infinity War, and Ant-Man, right? And then, they kind of don't go so crazy in 2019 because Endgame was so huge. And of course, the pandemic comes, right, as well. And that's another piece of it, I guess, is that the pandemic changed the way we see movies and what we were looking for films. Kind of really, really, shuffled the film industry, right? And so then you've got, when you think about what came out in 2021 for Marvel movies, Black Widow movie, which I haven't seen yet, but seems like it's pretty cool. Shang-Chi, I know people liked, and then Eternals. They aren't like big projects, right? There's almost a sense of like there's a bit of hubris involved where they think, okay, we're able to turn Iron Man, Thor, whoever into big stars. We can do the same thing with these other sort of lesser known Marvel characters and make the same thing happen. It doesn't really work out for them. But it seems like it's one of those things where every year they have so many movies, or they have at least 3 movies, plus they start putting out the TV shows in 2021, right? So we start getting those Disney Plus TV shows. It's all too much. And I think that's the thing in 2008, and maybe they come back to this, because I know that they're taking next year off for the most part. I think they're putting out the Deadpool movie in 2024, but for the most part, they're taking a break. I know Columbia is really pushing, like, Craven or whatever, they're pushing their stuff, but Marvel's kind of slowing down a bit. I don't know what they have for TV shows. I know they've got the Echo TV show coming, but I wonder if there's a sense of like, okay, we're flooding the market with too much stuff, and maybe we need to get back to the 1 movie a year, maybe 1 movie, 1 TV show a year, maybe 2 movies a year, something like that, to sort of give people a little bit of a break. Because I think that's ultimately what did them in this year. I don't know that it was necessarily that, Ms. Marvel or the Marvels had to do homework to watch them, or that guys didn't like the idea. Because I saw a report that actually it was 60% of the people seeing the film were men, I think, versus women seeing the movie. So I don't think there were too many guys that were like, I don't want to watch a female-driven movie. But I think the fact that there was just the market was too flooded, that there was Marvel's or Disney's kind of overextended themselves with just too much stuff between the shows and the movies. And looking back on this time here, where they could really focus on Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, get them out and have them be successful. Nothing comes out in 2009. Iron Man 2 comes out in 2010. Thor and Captain America in 2011. Avengers in 2012. That's it. That's all we get, right? And so to have 6 movies over 4 years versus, again, what we're looking at, 6 movies in 2 years, plus the TV shows, like that's, right. Like think about they had 3 movies each year, right? 2022 and 2023, plus all those TV shows that they have coming out. People get tired of it, and they just say, okay, I'm just going to watch something else. I'm just going to go look at, the thing with Barbie, right, was that Barbie was fresh. Barbie was new, but also there wasn't a sense of like, there's so much they had to keep up with Barbie, right? And maybe they're going to bring it back. Maybe they're going to pare it down some here, because I think that's the other piece of this that I had kind of forgotten at the time, that I didn't think about in 08 and 09, is that there wasn't as much Marvel Cinematic Universe content, right? There was all these other Marvel projects that were coming out from other studios, but I could ignore those, right? If the Marvel Cinematic Universe was creating a a standard, right, that was higher than for example, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Think about that, right? Think about '08 to 2010, which again, when we do the next episode of this, we'll be talking about Iron Man 2 and Thor. But just think about that from a time standpoint, right? We'll push the Punisher Warzone out, right? We won't count that because that wasn't really that wasn't really competing for screens, right? So Iron Man, Incredible Hulk in 2008, X-Men's Origin Wolverine, absolute dud of a movie, comes out in 2009. Again, I don't know what they were thinking with Deadpool or any of that stuff that's in there. So now, for us as a movie viewer, we've had this really great experience with Iron Man, solid experience with Incredible Hulk, horrible experience with X-Men Origin Wolverines. Iron Man 2 comes out, we're all ready for it. Like, we're excited for this, So that was the other piece of it, right? Is that Disney, like, if there was a bad movie, right, like an X-Men's Origin Wolverine, it wasn't on Disney that movie didn't do well, right? That was on 20th Century Fox and how they created it. They were able to, because they were focusing on just their projects that they were doing. So it's another piece of this that looking back on it now, that I think, maybe Marvel will kind of go back to their roots there. And I don't know that they can, too, because they've been bought out by Disney. And Disney does not have a mindset of like, oh, let's put out like, one quality movie every year versus putting out 3 movies. Maybe they need to start, right? And I'm not saying that Ms. Marvel's wasn't that the Marvels wasn't a quality movie. I thought it was really good. But, when you put out 3 movies that you spend, 220 to 250 a million, 250 to 220 million or whatever it is a year, or, a picture that you're making there, right? If you're laying out 750 or 300 or $750 million to make movies, they got to pull in 3 times that number. So you need to pull in like $2.5 billion from those movies just to get your money back. If you just put out one movie that's just really, really good and you spend $250 million on it and it makes $1 billion, right? You're out ahead, right? You're ahead there. So I don't know. Maybe they kind of come back to that. The other thing too is they needed to make those series, right? They had to have those Disney Plus series because they needed to sell Disney Plus, right? They needed people to buy Disney Plus, and so they had to put all these series on there and flood that. And it ended up being that they double dipped there, right? Because they hurt themselves in the box office when their movies weren't doing as well because people were used to getting the content on Disney Plus. I think that also hurts with the Marvels because people were waiting for it to just come out on Disney Plus, which I guess Disney announced that they're not going to be putting it out anytime soon on Disney Plus. So it's like, oh, if you missed your chance to see it at the theater, you're out of luck, which, that's not saying that's a horrible thing. Like, that's a good thing. But people got used to consuming their content on Disney Plus. And so they hurt themselves in the box office because, one, they diluted their product, and 2, they got people used to going there as opposed to going to the theater for their product, right? That was the thing with Marvel. When you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the first 3 phases, they were creating events out of every movie that was coming out. These movies that are coming out now aren't events, right? And it's not just the Marvels, right? Ant-Man wasn't an event. The Guardians of the Galaxy was more of an event, right? Because people had watched the first 2, they were excited to watch the third one. But, I don't know that the Thor movie was much of an event, right? The Love and Thunder, or the Black Panther movie, which, it suffered, right? Because it, because it didn't have Chadwick Boseman in it. I think it didn't quite do as well. I think they were also trying to sell the fact that they were introducing us to Namor in some way, which is interesting, right? Because again, we're dealing with this whole situation with him. With him being kind of, I don't want to say held hostage by Universal, but right, they can't put him in the film the way they wanted to because of that, right? Because he, Universal owns the rights, and again, they don't want to do him a solid. So, the Black Panther movie, made 1.3 million, and I can't remember what the other one made. I think it was less than that, though. I don't think it made quite that much. It's very interesting that I'm trying to look it up on trying to look it up on IMDb, and you'd think that like when it would talk about other movies to look at, I guess it's because I was looking maybe in the wrong, I was looking in the wrong section. No, I wasn't. So just to give you a sense with IMDb, right? If I'm looking up Black Panther, you'd think the first movie that they would suggest as another one to look up is Wakanda Forever. But no, they were giving me all these other ones to look at instead, which is ridiculous. So, and I know I shouldn't be in real time looking things up because that's really fun really fun listening. But anyway, yeah. 850 million is what it did, right? So it didn't quite do what the first one did. And again, it had a budget of 250 million. So, it just did barely what it needed to do, right? So again, the movie's got to make 3 times its gross back. It has a runtime of 2 hours and 41 minutes. I mean, I haven't seen Wakanda Forever yet. I haven't seen that one, so I haven't got into it. And the thing about the first Black Panther movie is, again, talking about, and I know I'm kind of going over time here. We're kind of really going for it here, but again, the budget was less, right? So the first Black Panther movie, it was a shorter movie, 2 hours and 14 minutes long. Budget was less, right? And it grosses 1.3 million, right? So the return on investment was way higher. I think part of that, Chadwick Boseman was fantastic. I mean, Chadwick Boseman was, when you think of Christopher Reeve, right, and you say, okay, that's Superman. Chadwick Boseman did that for Black Panther. And I mean, Black Panther was, they essentially remade Superman, but did it as Black Panther in a way that, covered a lot of different issues in that film. Just did a really fantastic job with it. And when I say it's like Superman, it's not Superman the way that I'm saying that, like, Spider-Man 2 is a Superman, or Iron Man is, in the sense that it changes the game. I don't think that Black Panther changed the game so much as it furthered Marvel's dominance, right? And I mean, and maybe it isn't so much, right, that whether the movie had the fact that it was missing Chadwick Boseman, and it needed, he was so tied into being him, and I think people, maybe were watching it with a heavy heart, since he had passed away. But also there is that part that, the law of diminishing returns of, what we're expecting for movies now. And I think that, again, 2 hours and 41 minutes is a whole different thing from 2 hours and 15 minutes with it being this novel concept of, Black Panther, this new, great new hero, and everybody was excited to see it. So anyway, I'm kind of going over here. I've talked quite a bit here about this stuff, so it's probably time for us to wrap this up. So again, in 2 weeks, we will be looking at Iron Man 2 and the first Thor movie. But, kind of wrapping up here with Incredible Hulk, I think there are a few things, again. One is that this movie does a better job than Ang Lee's Hulk and marrying the comic book side and the TV show element of it. Norton does a really great job of splitting that difference there. The movie does a really great job with their Hulk, with the fight, with Abomination, all of that. And then the other piece, of course, is the fact that because Universal owns the distribution rights, when Disney buys up Marvel Studios, they don't want to give Universal a win. So that's why we have not had another Incredible Hulk movie since this one. So we've got 2 more Iron Man movies to go. Only part 2 will be in this phase 1 that we'll be looking at here. But yeah. So anyway, so that's where we're lose that. But yeah. So why don't we'll wrap up here. I'll do my plugs here quickly again. dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's the site. That's where you can kind of find links to everything. My novels, the Threadless page that I talked about earlier. If you want to buy some DTVC merch. Also some of those old reviews that I talked about, like for example, doing the Ang Lee Hulk that I reviewed, and also the Incredible Hulk. And again, going back to the opening, the archive is back up and running, so you can just go to the archive and click on I for Incredible Hulk, or just H for Hulk, and you can check out those reviews if you're curious to see what I wrote about there. Again, with the novels, my novel site is MatthewPoirierAuthor.com. So MatthewPoirierAuthor.com. As you can find links to all of my novels. I'm always happy for anybody to buy any of those. Of course, probably the one that's closest for the action fans that listen to the site would be Bainbridge, my short action novel that follows John Bainbridge, a cop on the edge in the early 90s, kind of a throwback, send-up and tribute to PM Entertainment flicks, Canon Films, AIP, all of that kind of thing. But yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon. All right, bye everybody.
Extra.